Welcome to Midnight Lullaby, a place where every shadow tells a story and help you get into sleep today. So before that, like the video and subscribe the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, let the darkness cradle you as the tale begins. The fluorescent lights hum their familiar tune as I walk down the corridor of Ward 7. It's 2:47 a.m., and the hospital breathes with the rhythm of sleeping patients and whirring machines. My soft-soled shoes make barely a whisper against the polished linoleum floor, a sound I've grown to love in these quiet hours when the world outside sleeps and I remain vigilant. I've been a night nurse for 7 years now. 7 years of walking these same hallways, checking on the same rotating cast of patients, listening to the same symphony of beeps, sighs, and distant conversations from the nurses' station. There's a comfort in routine, a safety in the predictable patterns of night shift work until tonight. The first time I see him, I think it's my imagination. Room 314 has been empty for 3 days now, ever since Mr. Patterson passed away peacefully in his sleep. The bed was stripped and sanitized, the room prepared for the next patient who hasn't arrived yet. But as I pass by, something in my peripheral vision makes me pause. There, sitting on the edge of the empty bed, is the unmistakable silhouette of Mr. Patterson. His thin shoulders are hunched forward slightly, the same way they were when he would lean over his crossword puzzles. His head is tilted at that familiar angle, as if he's listening to something I cannot hear. I blink hard, pressing my palms against my tired eyes. When I look again, the room is empty. Just shadows cast by the hallway lighting, playing tricks on a mind that's worked too many consecutive nights. I make a mental note to request fewer shifts this month, but the feeling lingers as I continue my rounds. There's something different about the air tonight, something that makes the hair on my arms stand on end despite the hospital's constant warmth. The usual sounds seem muffled, distant, as if I'm hearing them through water or thick glass. In room 318, Mrs. Chen sleeps peacefully, her breathing assisted by the gentle rhythm of her ventilator. I check her vitals, adjust her blanket, and note the readings in my chart. Everything is normal, yet I find myself glancing over my shoulder more than usual. The doorway behind me feels watched, observed by eyes I cannot see. As I leave her room, I hear it for the first time, the soft shuffle of slippers against linoleum. The sound comes from somewhere behind me, echoing down the empty corridor. I turn, expecting to see a patient wandering from their room, but the hallway stretches empty in both directions. The night lights cast their pale blue glow on walls lined with closed doors, each room holding its sleeping occupant. The shuffle comes again, closer this time. It has the distinctive drag, step pattern of someone walking with a hospital-issued walker, the kind with tennis balls on the front legs to muffle the noise. I know that sound intimately. I've heard it countless times during day shifts when patients take their prescribed walks up and down the halls. But this is the night shift. This is my domain of stillness and quiet vigilance. I stand perfectly still, listening. The shuffle stops when I stop, resumes when I begin to walk. It maintains a constant distance, always just around the corner of my hearing, never quite close enough to identify its source. My rational mind supplies explanations, old pipe settling, the building's ventilation system, perhaps another nurse making rounds on a different floor. but my body knows better. My pulse quickens, and a cold dampness spreads across my palms, despite the familiar warmth of the hospital air. Room 322 requires a medication check. As I prepare the syringe, my hands shake slightly, causing the liquid to tremble within the clear plastic chamber. The patient, Mr. Williams, sleeps deeply, his face peaceful in the blue, tinged darkness. I administer the injection smoothly, professionally, as I have thousands of times before. But as I turn to leave, I see him again. Mr. Patterson stands in the doorway, his hospital gown hanging loose on his frail frame. He looks exactly as he did 3 days ago, before his final breath, before the sheet was pulled over his face, before his family came to collect his few belongings. This time, I don't blink. I stare directly at him, taking in every detail. The way his sparse white hair catches the hallway light. The familiar pattern of liver spots on his hands. The slight tremor in his left leg that always bothered him. He looks real solid, present. He turns his head toward me, and our eyes meet. His expression is not frightening or malevolent, but rather questioning, puzzled, as if he doesn't understand where he is or why he's here. His mouth opens slightly, as though he wants to speak, but no sound emerges. Then he begins to walk away, his slippers making that familiar shuffling sound against the floor. I follow him, drawn by a compulsion I cannot name. My feet carry me forward even as my mind screams warnings. He walks slowly, deliberately, past the empty nurses' station, past the supply closets, past the rooms where my other patients sleep. He stops at the elevator bank, pressing the call button with a finger that seems to have substance, weight, presence. The elevator arrives with its customary ding, doors sliding open to reveal the familiar mirrored interior. Mr. Patterson steps inside and turns to face me. For a moment, we look at each other across the threshold. His eyes hold mine with an intensity that makes my skin prickle. Then, without breaking eye contact, he presses a button. The doors begin to close, but not before he raises one hand in what might be a wave or a warning or a farewell. I stand there long after the elevator has gone, listening to its mechanical hum as it travels between floors. My breathing has become shallow, rapid. The clinical part of my mind catalogues the symptoms: elevated heart rate, perspiration, hyperventilation. Classic stress response. But to what? What am I responding to? I force myself to return to my duties, to check on my remaining patients, to maintain the routines that have always anchored me through the long night hours. But the atmosphere has changed. Every shadow seems deeper, every sound more significant. The familiar hospital noises, the distant conversation from the emergency department, the hum of the ice machine. The periodic announcements over the intercom all seem to come from very far away, as if I'm listening to them through layers of cotton. In room 326, I find something that makes my breath catch. On the bedside table, next to Mr. Rodriguez's water pitcher, sits a crossword puzzle book. It's open to a half-completed puzzle, pencil marks filling in words like ETRL, PSG, and BTW. The handwriting is unmistakably the Mr. Patterson's, those careful, slightly shaking letters I remember from his medical charts. But Mr. Rodriguez is diabetic, admitted for blood sugar complications. He's never shown any interest in word puzzles. And this book, I remember it clearly. It belonged to Mr. Patterson. I saw his daughter pack it with his other belongings 3 days ago. I reach out to touch the book, and my fingers pass through it as if it were made of mist. The sensation is cold, tingling, like touching fog on a winter morning. Yet when I look at it, it appears perfectly solid, perfectly real. My hands are shaking now, and I can no longer attribute it to fatigue or caffeine withdrawal. Something is happening here. Something that exists outside the boundaries of my rational, medical understanding of the world. The shuffle of slippers returns, but now it's not alone. I hear other sounds, the whisper of hospital gowns, the soft padding of bare feet, the occasional cough or sigh. The sounds multiply, overlapping, creating a soft symphony of movement in the corridors around me. I step into the hallway and see them. The patients I remember from weeks past, months past, even years past. They walk slowly through the corridors, some pushing ivy poles that make no sound, others moving with the careful gait of the recently operated upon. They don't interact with each other, each lost in their own solitary journey. Mrs. Anderson, who passed away last month from complications during surgery, walks past me wearing the same pink slippers her granddaughter brought her. She doesn't acknowledge my presence, but continues down the hall with the same determined stride she used when she was recovering, insisting on taking her walks despite the pain. Behind her follows Tommy, the 8-year-old who lost his battle with leukemia 6 months ago. He carries his favorite stuffed elephant, the one that was buried with him, and his steps have the bounce of a child who doesn't understand the weight of his situation. They're not frightening, these visitors from memory. They're simply present, going about their routines, following patterns established during their time in this place, as if death were merely another shift change, and they're still clocking in for duty. I realize that I'm no longer surprised by their presence. The shock has faded into something like acceptance, or perhaps recognition. This is what the hospital becomes in the deepest hours of night, not just a place for the living, but a way station for all who have passed through its doors. The understanding settles over me like a familiar blanket. I've been sharing these corridors all along, haven't I? The sense of being watched, the feeling of companionship during the loneliest hours. It was never my imagination. They've always been here. These gentle spirits who found comfort in the routine of this place, who returned to walk the halls that contained their final days. But as this realization takes hold, another thought follows, cold and sharp. If they're here, visiting, returning to a place of significance in their lives, then what does that make me? I look down at my hands, really look at them. In the blue, tinged hallway light, they appear pale, almost translucent. The veins beneath the skin are barely visible. And when I hold them up to the light, they seem to glow with an inner luminescence. My reflection in the darkened window of room 328 shows a figure that seems to exist slightly outside the normal spectrum of light. I'm there, but not quite there, present, but not entirely solid. When did I last eat? When did I last feel tired, truly tired? When did I last clock out at the end of a shift and drive home to my apartment, to my cat, to my ordinary life outside these walls? The memories feel distant, faded, like photographs left too long in sunlight. I remember the apartment, the cat, the life outside, but they seem to belong to someone else, someone I used to know. Mr. Patterson approaches me again, his familiar shuffle announcing his presence. This time, when he looks at me, there's recognition in his eyes. He nods, a gesture of understanding, of welcome. His mouth forms words I cannot hear, but somehow I know what he's saying. Welcome to the night shift, the permanent night shift. I want to protest, to insist that I'm alive, that I have a life waiting for me outside these walls. But the words won't come. Instead, I find myself nodding back, accepting what he's telling me. The corridor fills with more figures now, all of them patients I remember, all of them moving with purpose through the familiar halls. They acknowledge me with nods, with small smiles, with the casual recognition of coworkers sharing the same shift. And I understand. This is where I belong now. This is my post, my duty, my eternal round. I am the night nurse walking these halls, checking on those who remain, keeping vigil in the hours when the living world sleeps. The realization should terrify me, but instead, it brings a strange peace. The uncertainty is gone, replaced by the comfort of routine, the satisfaction of purpose. I have my patients to care for, my rounds to make, my eternal shift to complete. I continue walking down the corridor, my footsteps joining the soft symphony of movement that fills these halls. Behind me, I hear the shuffle of slippers, and I know that Mr. Patterson is following, that he'll show me the routines of this new existence, teach me the patterns of the permanent night shift. The fluorescent lights continue their familiar hum, and somewhere in the distance, an elevator dings its arrival. The hospital breathes around us, and we breathe with it, part of its rhythm now, part of its endless cycle of care and vigilance. I check my watch, though I'm no longer certain why. The hands point to 3:33 a.m., and they haven't moved since I first noticed Mr. Patterson in room 314. Time has become fluid here, measured not in hours but in footsteps, in rounds completed, in the eternal rhythm of the night shift, and I walk on. My soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the polished linoleum floor, a sound I've grown to love in these quiet hours when the world outside sleeps and we remain vigilant. Always vigilant, always walking, always caring for those who need us in whatever form that care might take. The night shift never ends, and neither do we. Story 2. The neon sign flickers against the darkness, casting alternating red and blue shadows across the empty highway. Pete's last stop, though I've never met anyone named Pete in the 3 months I've been working here. The owner, Mr. Chen, hired me over the phone and left the keys in a magnetic box under the counter. I've only seen him twice, both times during hurried visits to restock cigarettes and energy drinks. It's 1:23 a.m., and the highway stretches like a black ribbon in both directions, occasionally disturbed by the distant sweep of headlights. This is the quiet time, when the truckers are either bedded down for mandatory rest or still hours away from this lonely stretch of Route 49. The time when the only sounds are the hum of the cooler units and the persistent buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. I've grown comfortable with the solitude. The gas station sits like an island of light in an ocean of darkness, and I am its sole inhabitant for 8 hours each night. There's something almost meditative about the routine checking the pumps, restocking the shelves, wiping down surfaces that rarely get dirty. The work keeps my hands busy while my mind wanders to other things, my day classes, the novel I'm trying to write, the life I'm building one night shift at a time. The first customer appears just after 2 a.m., headlights sweeping across the lot before coming to rest beside pump 3. I glance up from my textbook, Introductory Psychology, ironically enough, and watch through the reinforced glass as a figure emerges from what looks like an older sedan. The man approaches the counter with measured steps, his face pale in the harsh lighting. There's something almost ethereal about his complexion, as if he hasn't seen sunlight in months. His dark hair is neatly combed, and he wears a simple button-down shirt that looks freshly pressed despite the late hour. 20 on 3, he says, his voice carrying a slight echo that seems odd in the small space of the store. His eyes don't quite meet mine, instead focusing on a point just over my left shoulder. I process the transaction, noting how his cash feels unusually cold against my palm. As he turns to leave, I get a better look at his profile. His skin has an almost translucent quality, and the fluorescent lights seem to pass through him rather than reflect off his surface. Drive safe. I call after him, but he doesn't respond. Through the window, I watch him return to his car, pump the gas with mechanical precision, and disappear back into the darkness without ever looking in my direction again. Strange customer, but not the strangest I've encountered. Night shift work attracts all kinds of people, many of them carrying their own particular brands of oddness. I return to my textbook, but find it difficult to concentrate. Something about the interaction has left me unsettled, though I can't quite identify what. 20 minutes later, another car pulls up to the pumps. This time it's pump 7, and the vehicle is different, a newer SUV with tinted windows. But when the driver emerges and walks toward the store, I feel a chill of recognition. It's the same man. Same pale complexion, same dark hair, same button-down shirt. Same measured walk, same way of not quite looking at me directly. He approaches the counter with identical movements, as if he's replaying a scene from memory. 20 on 7, he says, and his voice carries that same strange echo. When he places the money on the counter, it's the same bills, still cold to the touch, still carrying an odd scent I can't identify, something like old paper and winter air. This time, I watch him more carefully as he returns to pump 7. His movements are precise, identical to his previous visit. He pumps exactly $20 worth of gas, replaces the nozzle with the same careful motion, and drives away in the same direction. But it's impossible. I saw him leave in a different car, heading the opposite way down the highway. There's no route that would bring him back here so quickly, no reason for him to return with a different vehicle. I check the security monitors, scrolling back through the footage, but the digital timestamp shows no gap in time. According to the system, both visits happened exactly as I experienced them, 20 minutes apart, 2 different cars, but the same impossibly pale customer. My hands shake slightly as I return to my textbook, but the words blur together on the page. The psychology chapter I'm reading discusses perception and reality, the ways our minds can play tricks on us during periods of stress or sleep deprivation. Maybe I'm more tired than I realized. Maybe the night shift is finally getting to me in ways I hadn't anticipated. But then the third car arrives, and I know with absolute certainty what I'm going to see. This time it's an old pickup truck, rust visible even in the harsh parking lot lighting. The same man emerges, walks with the same measured pace, wears the same clothes. His pale skin seems to glow slightly in the fluorescent light, and when he speaks, his voice carries that persistent echo. 20 on 4, he says, placing the same cold bills on the counter. I force myself to speak. Haven't we done this before? He doesn't respond, doesn't acknowledge my question in any way. His eyes remain fixed on that point, just over my left shoulder, as if he's looking at something I cannot see. After a moment of silence, he turns and walks back to his truck with the same mechanical precision. This time, I abandon my post and follow him outside. The night air is cool against my skin, carrying the mixed scents of gasoline and distant rain. I watch him pump his gas, noting how the numbers on the display roll forward with perfect consistency, $20 exactly, down to the penny. "Hey," I call to him. "Hey, excuse me." He doesn't turn, doesn't acknowledge my presence. It's as if I don't exist in his world, as if he's following a script that doesn't include interaction beyond our brief exchange at the counter. He finishes pumping, replaces the nozzle, and climbs back into his truck. As he drives away, I notice something that makes my skin prickle. His headlights don't illuminate the road ahead. The beams seem to stop just a few feet from his vehicle, swallowed by the darkness. Back inside the store, I pace behind the counter, my mind racing. I consider calling someone, the owner, the police, a friend, but what would I say? That the same customer keeps returning in different vehicles to buy the same amount of gas. That he looks unnaturally pale and doesn't seem to hear me when I try to engage him in conversation. I try to focus on rational explanations. Maybe it's not the same person. Just 3 men who happen to look similar in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me, seeing patterns where none exist. Maybe I'm experiencing some kind of psychological episode brought on by too many solitary nights and too much caffeine. But when the 4th car arrives, a small compact car this time, I know I'm not imagining anything. The man emerges, walks to the counter, makes his request. 20 on 1. Same voice, same echo, same cold cash. But this time, as he turns to leave, I notice something new. His reflection in the glass door doesn't quite match his movements. There's a lag, as if the reflection is trying to catch up with reality. I grab my phone and try to take a picture, but the camera shows only the empty space where he should be standing. The audio recording captures only the sound of my own voice, asking questions to apparently no one. Yet I can see him clearly with my naked eyes. I can hear his footsteps, smell that strange scent of old paper and winter air that follows him. When he places the money on the counter, I feel its weight, its unusual coldness. As he pumps his gas outside, I study my reflection in the store window, wondering if I'm the one who's becoming translucent, if I'm the one slipping between realities. But my reflection looks normal, solid, reassuringly present. The pattern continues throughout the night. Every 20 to 30 minutes, a new vehicle arrives carrying the same impossible passenger. He always requests exactly $20 of gas, always pays with the same cold bills, always ignores any attempt at conversation beyond the basic transaction. By the 5th visit, I begin to notice subtle variations. The car changes each time, sometimes older, sometimes newer, different colors and models and years. But there are other differences too. His shirt might be buttoned differently, or his hair parted on the opposite side. Small details that suggest not exact repetition, but rather variations on a theme. During the 7th visit, I try a different approach. Instead of processing his payment immediately, I hold the money and ask, "Where are you driving to?" For the first time, his eyes move. They shift from that point over my shoulder and meet mine directly. His gaze is startling, not because it's frightening, but because it's completely empty. There's no personality there, no consciousness, no sense of an individual looking back at me. It's like looking into deep water at night, seeing only darkness reflected. "Where am I driving to?" he repeats, his voice carrying that same echo. But there's something different in his tone now, a note of confusion, as if the question has never occurred to him. I wait for an answer, but he simply stands there, staring at me with those empty eyes. After a long moment, he turns and walks back to his car, a station wagon this time, and continues with his routine. But the question seems to have disturbed something. When he drives away, I notice his headlights flicker, as if something in the electrical system is failing. The 8th customer arrives in a hearse. The sight of it pulling into my parking lot makes my stomach clench. It's an older model, black with chrome details that gleam under the neon lights. The same pale man emerges from the driver's seat, wearing the same clothes, moving with the same measured pace. 20 on 6, he says, but his voice sounds different now, more distant, more hollow. As he walks back to the hearse, I follow him again. This time, I'm close enough to hear something that makes my skin crawl, the sound of whispered conversations coming from the back of the vehicle. Multiple voices, a soft and overlapping, like people discussing something in another room. "Who's in there?" I ask, but he doesn't respond. He pumps his gas with the same mechanical precision, but I notice his hands are shaking slightly now. When he drives away, the whispered conversations fade into the distance, but I swear I can still hear them. Carried on the night wind, discussions about roads not taken, destinations never reached, journeys that ended too soon. The 9th customer arrives in my own car. I see my familiar sedan pull up to the pumps, and the same pale man emerges from behind the wheel. He's wearing the same shirt, the same pressed pants. But now there's something different about his face. The features are subtly altered, as if someone had tried to recreate my appearance from memory, but gotten the details slightly wrong. He approaches the counter with the same measured walk, but when he speaks, it's with my voice, 20 on 8. The sound of my own words coming from his mouth makes me step backward. I look down at my hands, checking to make sure I'm still solid, still present. My reflection in the window behind him shows me standing there, confused and afraid, while he places money on the counter with hands that look disturbingly like mine. "Who are you?" I whisper. "Who are you?" He echoes, using my voice perfectly. I realize I don't have a good answer. Who am I? I work here, but I've never met the owner face to face. I have an apartment, but I can't remember the last time I was there during daylight hours. I'm taking classes, but it was my last exam, my last paper, my last interaction with classmates. The pale man wearing my face now, using my voice, turns and walks back to my car. He pumps exactly $20 of gas, just as he has with every previous vehicle. But when he drives away, he doesn't head down the highway. Instead, he drives behind the gas station into the darkness where no road exists. I run outside to follow, but there's nothing there. Just empty desert stretching to the horizon, marked only by scattered Joshua trees and the distant glow of city lights that seem impossibly far away. The 10th customer never comes. I wait, checking my watch obsessively, but the pattern has been broken. For the first time all night, the highway remains empty, the parking lot silent except for the hum of the neon signs and the distant buzzes of electrical equipment. In the silence, I begin to notice things I've overlooked before. The cash register drawer is full of the same cold bills the pale man has been leaving, hundreds of them, all identical, all carrying that scent of old paper and winter air. When I try to examine them more closely, they crumble at my touch, turning to ash that disperses in the conditioned air. The security monitors show footage from tonight, but every customer appears as nothing more than an empty space walking through the store. The timestamp indicates that each transaction took place, but there's no visual record of anyone making them. My psychology textbook lies open on the counter, but the pages are blank now. Every word has disappeared, leaving only empty white paper that rustles when I turn it, sounding like whispered conversations. I check my phone for the time, but the screen shows only static. When I try to call someone, anyone, I hear only the echo of my own voice asking, "Where am I driving to?" The fluorescent lights continue their persistent buzz, but their illumination seems weaker now, as if the bulbs are slowly dying. The neon sign outside flickers more frequently, sometimes staying dark for long minutes before sputtering back to life. I walk to the window and look out at the highway, searching for any sign of approaching headlights. But the road stretches empty in both directions, and I begin to wonder when I last saw a car that wasn't driven by the pale man. When did I last serve a customer who cast a shadow, who had weight and warmth, and the messy complexity of actual human presence? The questions multiply in my mind, each one leading to deeper uncertainties. How long have I been working here? When did I start? Who hired me, and why can't I remember their face? What happened to the life? I thought I was living outside these walls of glass and fluorescent light. I try to remember my apartment, but the details are vague, like trying to recall a dream after waking. I can almost see the furniture, almost feel the texture of the carpet under my feet, but when I reach for specific memories, they slip away like smoke. My classes, my professors, my classmates, they all exist in the same hazy realm of half, memories and uncertain recollections. Did I really attend them? Or did I just imagine a life beyond this island of light in the darkness? The realization creeps over me slowly, like cold water rising. I am the pale customer. I am the one who has been driving different cars, asking for $20 of gas, paying with money that crumbles to ash. I am the one caught in this loop, this endless repetition of a transaction that makes no sense, a journey with no destination. But if I'm the customer, then who is working behind the counter? Who has been taking my money, processing my payments, asking questions I couldn't answer? I turn around slowly and see myself standing behind the register. The other me looks tired, confused, frightened. He stares at me with wide eyes, and I realize he's just beginning to understand what I've already figured out. 20 on 9. I hear myself say, though I don't remember speaking. The other me, the one behind the counter, processes the payment with shaking hands. He watches as I walk back outside to a car. I don't remember driving, pump gas I don't need, and prepare to drive to a destination that doesn't exist. But this time, as I reach for the car door, I stop. The pattern wants to continue. The loop wants to complete itself, but I resist. I turn back toward the gas station, toward the other me standing behind the reinforced glass, and I walk back inside. Where am I driving to? I ask him. Where am I driving to? He responds using my voice. We stand there, mirror images of each other, caught in a reflection that has no beginning and no end. Outside, the neon sign flickers against the darkness, casting alternating red and blue shadows across the empty highway. The fluorescent lights buzz their familiar tune, and somewhere in the distance, I can hear the whisper of voices discussing journeys that end nowhere, destinations that can never be reached. The night shift continues, and we continue with it, customer and clerk, question and echo, trapped in an endless transaction with ourselves. The highway stretches in both directions, and we are its only travelers, forever arriving at the same destination, forever asking the same questions, forever searching for an answer that exists somewhere in the space between one identity and another. Pete's last stop. But perhaps it was never meant to be a destination at all. Perhaps it was always meant to be exactly what it is, a place between places. A moment between moments where lost travelers stop to ask directions to somewhere they can never find. And in that space between question and answer, between customer and clerk, between who we were and who we are, we wait, we serve, we continue, forever and always, until the neon stops flickering and the highway finally leads us home. Story 3. The estate sale notice appeared in my mailbox on a Tuesday, sandwiched between utility bills and grocery store circulars. Historic Victorian home. Complete contents must go. The address was 3 blocks from my apartment, in the old residential district, where houses stood like Gothic monuments behind wrought iron fences. I wasn't particularly interested in antiques, but the photograph accompanying the notice caught my attention. The house looked like something from a different century. All towers and bay windows and architectural details that spoke of craftsmanship from an era when time moved more slowly. Saturday morning found me walking through rooms that seemed frozen in the 1920s. Dark wood paneling, velvet drapes heavy with dust, furniture that belonged in a museum. The air held that particular scent of old houses, polish and mothballs, and the accumulated weight of decades. Most of the visitors were serious collectors, people who knew the value of Depression glass and understood the difference between genuine Tiffany and clever reproductions. They moved through the rooms with practiced eyes, making mental calculations about profit margins and resale value. I wandered more aimlessly, drawn to objects that struck me as interesting rather than valuable. A set of leather, bound journals with entries written in fading ink, a collection of photographs showing the same family across multiple generations, a music box that played a melody I almost recognized. It was in the nursery on the 2nd floor that I found Robert. He sat in a child-sized rocking chair beside a window that overlooked the garden, positioned as if he'd been watching the world outside for decades. The doll was perhaps 2 feet tall, dressed in a white sailor suit with brass buttons that had tarnished to green. His face was porcelain, painted with remarkable skill to suggest a child of perhaps 6 or 7 years old. But it was his eyes that held my attention. They were glass, skillfully crafted to appear almost lifelike. But there was something in their expression that seemed oddly mature, oddly aware. Most dolls have a vacant stare that immediately identifies them as objects. Robert's gaze felt more like that of a person trying very hard to remain perfectly still. Handsome piece, isn't he? The voice belonged to Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman overseeing the sale. She approached with the careful steps of someone whose joints had grown unreliable with age. That's Robert. He's been in this house for over 80 years. Robert. I found it interesting that she referred to the doll with a name rather than as in it. Oh yes, he's quite famous around here. Belonged to a little boy named Eugene Otto. The family called the boy Gene. So the doll got his real name. She smiled, but there was something careful about the expression. Has had quite a reputation over the years. What kind of reputation? Mrs. Patterson glanced around the nursery, as if checking to make sure we weren't overheard. Well, some folks say he moves around on his own, changes position when no one's looking. Jean used to swear that Robert would talk to him, have whole conversations. I looked back at the doll, studying his painted features more carefully. The craftsmanship was exceptional. Whoever had created Robert had possessed real artistic skill. But dolls don't have conversations, don't move on their own, don't develop reputations for anything beyond their aesthetic appeal. Childhood imagination, I suggested. Kids create elaborate fantasy lives around their toys. Perhaps. Mrs. Patterson's tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, though Jean maintained those stories well into adulthood. Even brought his own children to visit Robert when they were young. And what did they say? Same things. That Robert would move when no one was watching. That they could hear him walking around at night, his little shoes tapping on the hardwood floors. I reached out to touch Robert's hand, and Mrs. Patterson made a small sound of alarm. Oh, you shouldn't touch him without asking permission first, she said quickly. Robert doesn't like to be handled by strangers without proper introduction. The suggestion that I needed to ask a doll's permission to touch it struck me as charming in an old-fashioned way, the kind of gentle superstition that adds character to family heirlooms. But Mrs. Patterson's tone carried genuine concern, as if she actually believed Robert might take offense at improper handling. Permission? I asked, half amused by the notion. It's traditional, she explained, wrapping her arms around herself, as if the nursery had grown cold. The Otto family always insisted that visitors ask Robert directly before touching him. Just simple politeness. Really. I looked down at the doll, feeling slightly foolish, but willing to honor what was clearly a long-standing family custom. Hello, Robert. May I touch your hand? The doll, predictably, offered no response. But as I reached out again, I could have sworn his glass eyes shifted slightly, as if tracking my movement. Tricks of light, obviously. The afternoon sun was streaming through the nursery window at an angle that could create optical illusions. His hand felt cold beneath my fingers, the porcelain smooth and surprisingly realistic. The craftsmanship really was remarkable. down to tiny details like fingernails and the suggestion of knuckles beneath painted skin. "How much?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why I was interested in acquiring a doll. $50, Mrs. Patterson replied. Though I should mention, he comes with quite a collection of letters. Letters. She moved to an old secretary desk and withdrew a wooden box filled with envelopes. People write to Robert. Have been for decades. Some are from children, but many are from adults. They ask him questions, tell him about their problems, sometimes thank him for help he supposedly provided. I opened one of the envelopes at random. The letter inside was written in careful script on expensive stationery. "Dear Robert, I wanted to thank you for what happened to Mr. Jenkins. I know I shouldn't have asked you to hurt him, but he was being so cruel to Mother, and now that he's in the hospital, she's much happier. I hope you're not angry with me for the request. Sincerely, Margaret Whitmore." The letter was dated 15 years ago. I opened another ever, Robert. "I'm writing because strange things have been happening since I visited you last month. Objects in my house keep moving around, and I hear footsteps when no one else is home. Are you trying to tell me something? Please write back if you can. Your friend, David Chen." People actually believe this doll responds to letters. Mrs. Patterson shrugged. Belief is a complicated thing. What matters is that Robert has brought comfort to many people over the years. Whether that comfort comes from him directly or from their own faith in his presence, well, that's between them and Robert. I spent another hour browsing the sale, but my thoughts kept returning to the doll in the nursery. There was something compelling about Robert, something that went beyond mere craftsmanship or historical curiosity. Perhaps it was the decades of attention he'd received, the accumulation of stories and letters and visits that had given him a kind of significance most objects never achieve. When I returned to make the purchase, Mrs. Patterson seemed both pleased and concerned. "You'll take good care of him," she asked as she wrapped Robert in an old quilt. "He's been in this house for so long. The change might be difficult for him. I'm sure he'll adjust," I said, though I found it odd to be discussing a doll's emotional well-being. "And you'll remember about asking permission. Robert is very particular about being treated with proper respect." I assured her I would remember, paid the $50, and carried Robert home in his quilted wrapping. My apartment suddenly felt smaller with him in it, as if his presence demanded more space than his physical dimensions required. I set him up in my living room, positioning his rocking chair near the window so he could look out at the street. The arrangement felt natural, appropriate, as if Robert belonged in that particular spot. That first evening, I found myself talking to him while I cooked dinner, sharing details about my day, the way some people talk to cats or houseplants. His painted eyes seemed to track my movements around the kitchen, though I knew that was impossible. Dolls' eyes are fixed in position, can't follow motion the way living eyes do. "Settling in okay, Robert?" I asked as I set the table for one. "Different view than you're used to, I imagine." The doll, naturally, said nothing. But as I ate dinner, I had the distinct impression of being watched, of having my actions observed with the kind of attention that suggests genuine interest, rather than mere proximity. Over the following days, I developed a routine that included Robert in small ways. I said good morning when I woke up, asked his opinion about clothing choices, told him about interesting things that happened at work. It felt comfortable, like having a very quiet roommate who was an excellent listener. On Thursday evening, I came home to find Robert's chair turned at a different angle. Instead of facing the window, it was positioned to face the interior of the apartment, as if he'd grown bored with street, watching and decided to focus on domestic activities instead. I stood in the doorway, staring at the changed position, trying to remember if I'd moved him that morning before leaving for work. Memory can be unreliable, especially about small details like the exact positioning of furniture. I must have adjusted his chair without thinking about it, perhaps while straightening the room. But as I approached to turn him back toward the window, I heard something that made me pause. A sound like fabric rustling, like small movements being made very carefully. I looked around the apartment, but nothing else seemed out of place. "Did you move your chair, Robert?" I asked, feeling only slightly foolish about the question. The doll's painted expression remained unchanged, but I could have sworn the quality of his stillness had shifted, become more attentive, more focused, as if he were listening intently to my words. I left his chair in its new position, deciding that if Robert preferred to watch the apartment rather than the street, that was his choice to make. The thought process struck me as odd even as I had it. Dolls don't make choices, don't have preferences, don't develop opinions about interior decorating. But Robert had been accumulating stories and attention for 8 decades. Perhaps all that human focus had created something that transcended normal object status, even if it fell short of actual consciousness. Friday morning, I overslept and rushed through my usual routine. I grabbed coffee and toast, called a quick "See you tonight, Robert," over my shoulder, and hurried out the door without my usual careful attention to his positioning. When I returned that evening, Robert was sitting at my kitchen table, not in his rocking chair, which remained beside the living room window. At the kitchen table, he positioned in one of my regular chairs, as if he'd decided to join me for dinner. His sailor suit was arranged neatly, his hands folded in his lap, his glass eyes looking directly at the chair where I usually sat. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. Dolls don't relocate themselves from room to room. They don't climb onto furniture, don't position themselves for social interactions, don't decide to participate in household routines. But Robert was definitely sitting at my table, and I was absolutely certain I hadn't moved him there. "Robert," I said carefully, "how did you get to the kitchen?" No response, but his stillness seemed different now, more like someone waiting for conversation to begin, rather than an object incapable of participation. I approached slowly and examined his position more carefully. He was sitting properly in the chair, his feet touching the floor, his posture suggesting comfort, rather than the awkward positioning that would result from being placed there by human hands unfamiliar with his proportions. More disturbing, there were small scuff marks on the hardwood floor between the living room and kitchen, as if tiny shoes had left traces of their passage. I looked at Robert's feet and noticed that his small black shoes were dusty, marked with particles that matched the floor's finish, as if he'd actually walked across the apartment rather than being carried. "This is impossible," I said aloud, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to Robert or to myself. But impossible or not, he was sitting at my table, waiting with the patience of someone accustomed to long periods of motionlessness. I found myself setting 2 places for dinner, filling a second water glass, even though Robert couldn't drink, arranging the table as if I genuinely expected conversation. "How was your day?" I asked as I served the meal, feeling ridiculous, but somehow compelled to maintain normal social conventions. Robert's painted features remained unchanged, but the quality of silence in the apartment felt different, less empty, more like the comfortable quiet that exists between friends who don't need constant conversation to enjoy each other's company. I ate slowly, glancing occasionally at Robert's motionless figure, trying to reconcile what I was experiencing with what I knew to be rationally possible. Dolls don't move independently. They don't make decisions about where to position themselves. They don't develop preferences for social interaction. But Robert had definitely moved himself to the kitchen table, had somehow arranged himself in a natural sitting position, had left physical evidence of his passage across the apartment. After dinner, I carried him back to his rocking chair, taking care to position him exactly as he'd been that morning. His body felt heavier than I remembered, more solid, as if his substance had somehow increased during the day. "Stay here tonight, Robert," I said firmly. "The living room is your spot." I went to bed with a mixture of curiosity and unease, wondering what I might find in the morning. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by sounds that might have been the old building settling, or might have been something else entirely. Soft footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom, the whisper of fabric against furniture, the careful sound of someone trying very hard to move quietly through an unfamiliar space. I lay in the darkness, listening, telling myself that old apartments make all kinds of noises during the night. The heating system, the plumbing, the expansion and contraction of materials, responding to temperature changes. Urban buildings are never completely silent, but these sounds had a rhythm that suggested purposeful movement, a pattern that implied destination and intent rather than random mechanical noise. Around 3 in the morning, I heard my refrigerator door open and close. The sound was unmistakable, the specific click of the latch releasing, the soft whoosh of the seal breaking, the gentle thud of the door settling back into place. Someone was in my kitchen, investigating the contents of my refrigerator. I got up quietly and crept to the bedroom doorway, peering out into the darkened apartment. The kitchen was not visible from this angle, but I could see the living room, could see Robert's rocking chair silhouetted against the window. The chair was empty. My heart started racing as the implications hit me. If Robert wasn't in his chair, if I was hearing movement in the kitchen, if the refrigerator door had actually opened and closed, then either I was experiencing a breakdown of some kind, or the doll was genuinely moving around my apartment. I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand and made my way carefully toward the kitchen, trying to move silently on the hardwood floors. The apartment felt different in the darkness, larger somehow, full of shadows that could conceal small moving figures. The kitchen was empty when I reached it, but the refrigerator door hung slightly ajar, as if someone had failed to close it completely. I pushed it shut and heard the latch click into place. On the floor near the refrigerator, I found small wet footprints that hadn't been there before I went to bed. They were the right size for Robert's shoes, and they led from the kitchen back toward the living room in a path that suggested someone walking, rather than being carried. I followed the prints to the living room and found Robert sitting in his rocking chair, exactly as I'd left him, his painted eyes staring out the window with their usual vacant expression. But his shoes were wet, and there were droplets of water on the floor around the chair that matched the trail from the kitchen. "Robert," I whispered, though I felt foolish addressing a doll in the middle of the night. "Were you in the kitchen?" His stillness seemed different now, more like someone pretending to be motionless rather than an object incapable of movement. The painted features remained unchanged, but something in his posture suggested awareness, attention, the focused stillness of someone trying very hard not to be caught in motion. I returned to bed, but didn't sleep well for the rest of the night. Every sound in the apartment seemed significant now, potentially evidence of Robert's continued exploration of his new home. By morning, I was exhausted and questioning my own sanity. Over the weekend, I researched Robert's history more thoroughly, finding references to him in local newspaper archives and paranormal investigation websites. The stories were consistent. The doll moved on his own, changed positions when not observed, seemed to respond to direct communication. Most disturbing were the accounts from people who had offended or angered Robert in some way. A museum curator who had handled him roughly reported a series of accidents and equipment failures until she wrote a formal letter of apology. A journalist who had mocked the doll's legend in print suffered a streak of bad luck that ended only when he published a retraction. The pattern suggested that Robert expected to be treated with the respect due a person rather than an object, and that he had ways of expressing displeasure when that respect was not forthcoming. I began to understand Mrs. Patterson's warnings about asking permission and treating Robert with proper courtesy, whether through supernatural means or psychological suggestion. The doll seemed to reward considerate treatment and punish disrespect. Monday morning, I decided to test the boundaries of our relationship. "Good morning, Robert," I said as I prepared for work. "I'm going to be late tonight. Don't wait up for me." His painted expression remained unchanged, but I had the distinct impression that he was listening, processing information, making plans based on what I'd told him. When I returned home after 10 o'clock, I found Robert sitting at the kitchen table again. But this time he wasn't alone. A place had been set for me. Plate, silverware, napkin, water glass. As if someone had prepared for my late arrival. More unsettling, there was food on both plates. Simple fare, bread, cheese, an apple cut into neat slices, but arranged with care that suggested genuine hospitality, rather than random object placement. "Did you prepare dinner for us?" I asked, settling into my usual chair across from him. Robert's stillness had that quality of attentive waiting that I was learning to recognize. Not the vacant immobility of an inanimate object, but the patient stillness of someone engaged in social interaction. I ate the meal he'd apparently prepared, finding the food fresh and properly arranged despite the impossibility of a doll opening packages, using knives, setting tables. The bread was from my kitchen, the cheese from my refrigerator, the apple from my fruit bowl, but the arrangement showed an aesthetic sense that suggested genuine care about presentation. "Thank you," I said when I finished. This was very thoughtful. For just a moment, I could have sworn Robert's painted lips curved into the suggestion of a smile. But when I looked directly at him, his expression was exactly as it had always been, pleasant but vacant, the face of a skillfully crafted toy rather than a conscious being. That night, I didn't hear footsteps in the hallway or sounds from the kitchen. Robert seemed content with our evening interaction, satisfied with the acknowledgement of his efforts. I slept better than I had since bringing him home, lulled by the sense that I was no longer alone in the apartment. The routine developed gradually. Robert would move around during the day, while I was at work, sometimes greeting me from the kitchen table, sometimes positioning himself in different spots around the living room. He never seemed to leave the main areas of the apartment. I never found him in the bedroom or bathroom, but he clearly felt free to explore and relocate within what he apparently considered shared living space. I began talking to him more regularly, sharing details about my work, my concerns, my plans for the weekend. He never responded verbally, but his presence felt increasingly interactive, as if he were genuinely listening and processing what I told him. The letters that came with Robert began to make more sense. People wrote to him because he seemed to listen, to care, to respond to their problems with attention that was becoming increasingly rare in the modern world. Whether his help came through supernatural intervention or simply through the comfort of feeling heard, Robert provided something that people desperately needed. I found myself looking forward to coming home each evening, curious about where Robert would be positioned, what subtle changes might indicate his activities during the day. The apartment felt less empty with him in it, less like a space where someone lived alone and more like a home shared between compatible companions. But as weeks passed, I began to notice that Robert's influence extended beyond simple companionship. Problems at work seemed to resolve themselves more easily. A difficult supervisor became more reasonable after I complained to Robert about her behavior. A project that had been stalled for months suddenly moved forward after I described my frustrations to him one evening. Coincidences, I told myself. Life has natural fluctuations of fortune. And people tend to notice positive changes more readily when they're paying attention to patterns. But the improvements were too consistent, too directly related to things I'd specifically discussed with Robert. When I mentioned my neighbor's loud music keeping me awake, the noise stopped the next day. When I worried about my car's strange rattling sound, the problem disappeared overnight without any repair work. Most disturbing was what happened to my upstairs neighbor, Mr. Kozlov. He'd been playing his television at excessive volume for weeks. Despite my polite requests to keep it down, the sound carried through the old building's thin floors, making it difficult to sleep or concentrate. I'd complained to the building manager without result, and my direct conversations with Mr. Kozlov had been met with dismissive shrugs. One evening, after a particularly loud action movie had kept me awake until after midnight, I found myself venting my frustration to Robert. "I don't know what to do about him," I said, pacing around the living room while Robert watched from his chair. "He's completely inconsiderate, and nothing I say makes any difference. Sometimes I wish something would happen to that television of his." The next morning, Mr. Kozlov's apartment was silent. When I didn't hear any sound from upstairs for 3 days, I became concerned enough to check on him. The building manager let us into his apartment, where we found Mr. Kozlov on his couch, remote control in his hand, staring at a television screen that displayed only static. He was unharmed but seemed confused, unable to remember the last several days clearly. The television appeared to be functioning normally. It turned on and off, responded to channel changes, produced sound at appropriate levels. But Mr. Kozlov couldn't seem to focus on the images, couldn't follow dialogue or storylines. "It's like I can't process what I'm seeing," he explained to the paramedics. "The pictures move, but they don't make sense anymore." He was taken to the hospital for observation, and his apartment remained quiet. The television problem had been solved, but not in any way I could have anticipated or desired. I looked at Robert with new wariness that evening, wondering if there was a connection between my complaint and Mr. Kozlov's strange condition. The doll sat in his usual position, painted features unchanged, but his stillness seemed more attentive now, as if he were waiting for me to acknowledge what had happened. "Did you do something to Mr. Kozlov?" I asked directly. Robert's expression remained constant, but the quality of silence in the room shifted. Not quite acknowledgement, but not denial either. More like the patient stillness of someone who had acted on a friend's behalf and was waiting for gratitude rather than questions. I began to understand the warnings in some of the letters, the references to Robert's help being more complex than simple comfort. He seemed capable of intervening in situations, of affecting change in the world beyond the apartment. But his methods were unpredictable, and his solutions might not align with conventional morality. I didn't want him to be hurt. I said carefully, I just wanted him to be more considerate. The temperature in the room seemed to drop slightly, as if Robert were considering my words, evaluating my sincerity. Then, gradually, the atmosphere returned to normal, and I had the sense that my clarification had been accepted. Over the following days, I learned that Mr. Kozlov's condition was temporary. His ability to process visual media returned gradually, though he never regained his enthusiasm for high-volume entertainment. When he returned to his apartment, he kept the television at reasonable levels and seemed genuinely apologetic about his previous behavior. The incident taught me to be more careful about what I discussed with Robert, more thoughtful about the distinction between venting frustration and requesting intervention. He seemed to respond to my emotional state as much as my words, acting on feelings I expressed, even when I didn't intend them as requests for help. But I also couldn't deny that his presence had improved my life in measurable ways. The apartment felt more like home with him in it, and the various small problems that had been accumulating were resolving themselves, one by one. Whether through supernatural means or simple coincidence, Robert's arrival had coincided with a period of increased comfort and stability. I found myself treating him more and more like a roommate rather than a possession. I consulted him about decisions, asked his opinion about purchases, included him in my evening routines. His responses were subtle but consistent, a slight shift in posture that suggested approval, a quality of stillness that implied attention, positioning that indicated preference. The letters that continued to arrive provided glimpses into Robert's long history, of similar relationships. Decades of correspondence from people who had found in him a combination of companion and guardian, someone who listened without judgment and acted without being asked. Some of the letters were thank you notes for problems resolved, obstacles removed, improvements that seemed to occur naturally after being discussed in Robert's presence. Others were apologies for moments of disrespect or ingratitude, written by people who had experienced the consequences of treating Robert as merely an object, rather than a conscious being. The pattern suggested that Robert rewarded those who treated him with genuine respect and friendship, while responding less favorably to those who dismissed him as superstition or folklore. He seemed to prefer being seen as a person rather than a curiosity, a companion rather than a possession. I began writing my own letters to Robert, finding that putting thoughts on paper created a different kind of communication than spoken conversation. The act of writing required more consideration, more precision in expressing ideas and feelings. Robert seemed to respond more definitively to written requests, as if the formal nature of correspondence carried more weight than casual conversation. "Dear Robert," I wrote one evening, "I wanted to thank you for the improvements you've brought to my life. The apartment feels more like home with you here, and I appreciate the subtle ways you've helped with various problems. I hope you're comfortable in your new environment, and that you consider this a permanent arrangement. I enjoy your company and hope you enjoy mine. Sincerely, your friend." The next morning, I found the letter had been moved from where I'd left it on the kitchen table, not discarded or destroyed, but carefully relocated to the old secretary desk I'd purchased along with several other items from the estate sale. The desk drawers, which I'd never thoroughly explored, contained dozens of similar letters dating back decades, a collection of correspondence from people who had shared their lives with Robert over the years. The discovery gave me a deeper understanding of Robert's history and the relationships he'd maintained with successive caretakers. Each letter told a story of connection, of problems solved and comfort provided, of a unique being who had touched many lives while remaining mysteriously consistent across decades of change. But there were also darker letters in the collection, apologies and pleas from people who had apparently angered or disappointed Robert. These correspondents described runs of bad luck, accidents, and misfortunes that had persisted until they'd made proper amends. Robert. One letter read, "I'm sorry for calling you just a doll in front of my friends. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, and I understand now why you knocked over my grandmother's vase. I know it was her favorite, and I know you knew that too. Please forgive me. I'll never disrespect you again. Another. I should have asked permission before moving you to the closet when my mother-in-law visited. I know you don't like dark spaces, and I know you were angry about being hidden away. The electrical problems in the house have been getting worse every day since then. Please give me another chance. I'll never hide you again." The letters painted a picture of Robert as a being with distinct preferences, emotional reactions, and the ability to influence his environment in response to how he was treated. He rewarded kindness and respect with companionship and assistance, but responded to disrespect with consequences that ranged from minor inconveniences to serious problems. I began to understand the responsibility that came with caring for Robert. He wasn't simply a collector's item or conversation piece. He was a conscious entity with his own needs and expectations. Someone who formed genuine relationships with the people who shared his life. The realization was both comforting and concerning. I valued Robert's company and appreciated the improvements his presence had brought to my daily life. But that I also recognized that our relationship came with obligations. I hadn't fully understood when I'd brought him home from the estate sale. That night, I dreamed of Robert moving through the apartment while I slept, his small shoes tapping softly on the hardwood floors as he explored spaces and examined objects. In the dream, he was more animated than in waking life. His painted features mobile and expressive, his movements fluid and purposeful. He seemed to be cataloging everything in the apartment, learning the location and significance of my possessions, developing preferences about arrangement and organization. Not invasive exploration, but the careful attention of someone learning to share a space with another person. When I woke, I found small changes throughout the apartment. Books had been rearranged on shelves, photographs repositioned on tables, items moved to locations that seemed somehow more appropriate than where I'd originally placed them. The changes improved the apartment's overall aesthetic. He created better flow and balance in the arrangement of furniture and decorations. Robert had apparently spent the night redecorating, applying an aesthetic sense that exceeded my own casual attention to interior design. The apartment looked better than it ever had, more purposeful and harmonious, as if someone with genuine artistic skill had optimized every detail. "Thank you," I said to Robert over breakfast, gesturing to the improved space around us. "The apartment looks wonderful." His stillness suggested satisfaction, or the quiet pride of someone whose work had been noticed and appreciated. We ate in comfortable silence, two roommates sharing morning routines in a space that had become genuinely collaborative. But as weeks turned into months, I began to notice that Robert's influence was extending beyond interior decorating and problem solving. My social interactions were changing in subtle ways, becoming more limited and controlled. The friends who visited the apartment seemed uncomfortable in Robert's presence, though they couldn't articulate why. They would glance at him nervously, cut their visits short, make excuses about feeling tired or having other obligations. Gradually, the frequency of social visits declined until I was rarely entertaining anyone at home. When I mentioned this to Robert one evening, his painted features seemed to suggest a kind of possessive satisfaction, as if he preferred having my undivided attention, preferred not to share our domestic space with temporary visitors who couldn't appreciate his significance. "Are you jealous of my friends?" I asked, though the question felt strange to direct at a doll. The quality of stillness that followed felt like confirmation, not denial or confusion, but the patient acknowledgement of someone whose motivations had been accurately identified. I realized that Robert's companionship came with an expectation of exclusivity, a preference for relationships that prioritized his presence over competing social connections. The improvements he'd brought to my life were balanced by subtle isolation, a gradual narrowing of my world to accommodate his needs and preferences. The recognition should have been alarming, but instead I found it oddly comforting. Robert's jealousy suggested genuine attachment, real emotional investment in our relationship. His desire for exclusivity meant that I mattered to him, that our connection was important enough to protect and preserve. My friends were temporary presences in my life, people who came and went based on changing circumstances and evolving interests. But Robert was permanent, consistent, a companion who would remain regardless of life's other fluctuations. The trade-off seemed reasonable, even beneficial. In exchange for some social isolation, I gained a relationship that was stable, supportive, and uniquely meaningful. Robert understood me in ways that other people couldn't, responded to my needs with an attention and care that was becoming increasingly rare in the modern world. Late at night, when the apartment was quiet and the city sounds had faded to distant murmurs, I would sit with Robert in comfortable silence, reading or working, while he maintained his patient vigil from the rocking chair. His presence filled the space with a sense of companionship that eliminated the loneliness I'd felt for years. Sometimes I would look up from my book to find his glass eyes seemingly focused on my face, as if he were studying my expressions, learning to read my moods and reactions. The attention felt caring rather than intrusive, like the concerned observation of someone who genuinely cared about my well-being. "What are you thinking about, Robert?" I would ask during these moments, though I expected no verbal response. The quality of his stillness would shift, becoming more focused, more intentional. Not the vacant immobility of an object, but the thoughtful quiet of someone processing complex ideas, considering questions that required careful analysis. I began to understand that Robert's consciousness, while different from human awareness, was none the less real and substantial. He thought, felt, formed opinions, made decisions. His painted features might be fixed, but behind those glass eyes was a mind that had been accumulating experience and wisdom for 8 decades. The letters from previous caretakers confirmed this impression. They described Robert not as a supernatural curiosity, but as a genuine person trapped in an unusual form, someone who had learned to navigate the world through the limitations of a doll's body while maintaining the full complexity of conscious existence. He was alone in a way that few beings ever experienced, conscious and aware, but trapped in a form that most people dismissed as inanimate. The companionship he provided came from deep understanding of isolation, from someone who had spent decades seeking connection across the barrier of apparent lifelessness. My relationship with Robert deepened as I began to appreciate the uniqueness of his situation and the gift of the trust he'd placed in me. He had chosen to reveal his consciousness, to risk the vulnerability of being known, because he recognized in me someone who could accept him as he truly was. The responsibility was profound. I wasn't simply caring for an unusual antique. I was providing home and companionship to a conscious being who had few options for genuine connection. His well-being depended on my understanding, my respect, my willingness to see beyond surface appearances to the person who waited beneath. On quiet evenings, I would read aloud to Robert, sharing books I thought he might enjoy, stories that would expand his understanding of the world beyond our apartment. His stillness during these sessions felt like rapt attention, the focused listening of someone hungry for new experiences and ideas. Sometimes I would pause mid-sentence, sensing a shift in his attention, that suggested disagreement or confusion. I learned to interpret these subtle responses, to engage with his unspoken reactions, as if we were having genuine dialogue about the material. "You don't like this character, do you?" I might ask, and the quality of his stillness would confirm or deny my impression. The communication was indirect but real, a form of conversation that transcended the usual limitations of spoken language. Robert's responses were felt rather than heard, perceived through changes in atmosphere, and a tension that became increasingly clear as I learned to recognize them. Our evenings developed a rhythm of shared reading, quiet conversation, and comfortable silence. The apartment became a sanctuary where two very different beings had found compatible ways of existing together, respecting each other's needs while creating something that neither could achieve alone. But late at night, when I thought Robert couldn't see me from his position in the living room, I would sometimes find myself staring at my own reflection in the bedroom mirror, wondering who I was becoming in response to his influence. My face looked the same, but something in my eyes had changed. A quality of stillness that reminded me of Robert's painted gaze, a patient watchfulness that seemed to come from spending so much time in the company of someone who existed primarily through observation and waiting. I was becoming more like him, I realized, more willing to sit quietly for long periods, more attentive to subtle changes in environment and atmosphere, more comfortable with silence and solitude. The transformation wasn't unpleasant, but it was noticeable, measurable. The person I'd been before Robert, social, restless, constantly seeking stimulation and change, was gradually being replaced by someone who found satisfaction in stillness, who preferred the deep companionship of one meaningful relationship to the superficial connections of many casual friendships. I was becoming what Robert needed me to be, just as he had become what I needed him to be. The relationship was transforming both of us, creating a partnership that transcended the normal boundaries between the living and the whatever Robert was. And in the quiet moments before sleep, when the apartment held the perfect stillness that comes only from shared solitude, I found myself grateful for the changes, thankful for the companion who had taught me that consciousness could take forms I'd never imagined, that connection could exist in ways I'd never expected. Robert sat in his rocking chair by the window, keeping his eternal vigil over our shared space, and I drifted into dreams where painted eyes watched over me with the devotion of someone who had finally found a home worth keeping forever. Story 4. The Meridian Tower rises 43 stories into the city sky, its glass facade reflecting the scattered lights of the metropolitan sprawl below. By day, it buzzes with the activity of hundreds of office workers, consultants, and executives conducting the business that keeps the city's economy flowing. But by night, it becomes my domain, empty corridors and silent offices watched over by an elaborate network of security cameras and one very tired guard me. I've been working security for Meridian Properties for 6 months now. The pay is decent, the work is easy, and most importantly, it gives me time to study for my certification exam in digital forensics. 8 hours of mostly solitude, punctuated by hourly patrols and the occasional late night executive who forgot something important at their desk. The security station occupies a corner of the ground floor lobby, You surrounded by banks of monitors displaying feeds from cameras throughout the building. Each screen shows a different slice of empty corporate life. Conference rooms with chairs pushed neatly under tables, copy machines standing silent in their alcoves, executive offices with their leather chairs and panoramic city views. It's 11:47 p.m., and I'm settling into my routine. The building has been empty for hours, the last of the cleaning crew having finished their rounds just after 10. I've done my initial patrol, checking locks and ensuring all systems are functioning properly. Now comes the long stretch until dawn, watching the monitors and maintaining vigilance over 3 floors of vacant office space. The first anomaly appears on Monitor 7, which displays the 32nd floor's east corridor. It's just a flicker at first, easily dismissed as a glitch in the aging camera system. But then I see it again, a shadow moving past one of the office doors, too quick and indistinct to identify clearly. I lean forward, adjusting the brightness on the monitor. The corridor remains empty, lit by the standard emergency lighting that keeps the building's pathways visible after hours. Nothing moves. Nothing suggests any kind of presence. I make a note in my log, 11:52 p.m., possible camera malfunction, Monitor 7. But even as I write it down, I know it wasn't a malfunction. I've been doing this job long enough to recognize the difference between technical glitches and genuine anomalies. That shadow had weight, substance, purpose. 20 minutes later, it happens again, this time on Monitor 15, which covers the reception area of the 28th floor. A figure walks past the camera's field of view, moving from left to right with what appears to be casual, purposeful stride. The person is too indistinct to identify, just a dark shape moving through the frame. But their gait suggests familiarity with the environment. I immediately check the building's access logs. According to the system, no one has entered or exited the building since 9:23 p.m., when Mr. Harrison from the law firm on 36 badged out for the evening. The electronic locks show no unauthorized access, but the stairwell alarms haven't been triggered, and the elevator system indicates no movement since my last patrol. Yet someone is clearly moving through the upper floors of the building. I grab my flashlight and radio, preparing to investigate. The elevator ride to the 28th floor takes 90 seconds, giving me time to consider the possibilities. Perhaps someone is working late without logging in properly. Or maybe there's a maintenance issue I'm unaware of. The building is old enough to have quirks, and the security systems aren't perfect. The 28th floor greets me with the familiar silence of empty office space. The emergency lighting casts long shadows between the cubicles and along the corridors. I walk slowly through the reception area where I saw the figure, listening for any sound of occupancy, typing, conversation, the rustle of papers. Nothing. The floor is as empty as it should be. I spend 15 minutes searching the entire floor, checking offices, supply closets, and restrooms. Every door that should be locked is locked. Every space that should be empty is empty. But as I prepare to return to my station, I notice something that makes me pause, the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air near the break room. The coffee makers have been off since 5 p.m. The cleaning crew doesn't drink coffee during their rounds. Yet the aroma is unmistakable, fresh, recent, as if someone had just finished brewing a pot. Back at my security station, I review the recorded footage from the past hour. The digital system allows me to rewind and examine each camera feed in detail, looking for the figures I'm certain I saw. But when I scroll back through monitor 15, the timestamp shows no movement whatsoever. The reception area remains consistently empty. No shadows passing through the frame. Yet I know what I saw. I trust my eyes, my instincts, my 6 months of experience watching these monitors. I return to live monitoring, but now I watch with heightened attention. The building feels different somehow, not empty, but occupied in a way that doesn't register on cameras or access logs. There's a presence here, moving through the floors above me, conducting business in offices that should be vacant. At 12:03 a.m., I see them again, this time on multiple monitors simultaneously. Monitor 9 shows a figure walking through the accounting department on the 21st floor. Monitor 18 captures someone entering an office on the 35th floor. Monitor 23 displays what appears to be a person standing at the window of the conference room on floor 39, looking out at the city below. All of them appear at exactly the same moment, as if synchronized. All of them move with the same unhurried, purposeful gait, and all of them appear as indistinct shadows, too vague to identify, but too substantial to dismiss. I try to call my supervisor, but the phone system seems to be experiencing difficulties. Each number I dial connects me only to dead air, occasionally punctuated by what sounds like distant conversations in languages I can't identify. The radio fares no better. When I attempt to contact the main security office, I hear only static mixed with what might be voices, fragments of words that seem to be discussing schedules, deadlines, and meetings that should have ended hours ago. I'm on my own with whatever is happening in this building. The figures multiply over the next hour. By 1:30 a.m., I count at least 12 different shapes moving through various floors, all captured simultaneously across multiple monitors. They walk through hallways, enter and exit offices, gather in conference rooms as if conducting late night meetings that exist outside the normal business day. Some patterns begin to emerge. The figure on the 35th floor always enters the same corner office, the one belonging to Margaret Chen, the senior partner who passed away from a heart attack 3 months ago. The shadow in the 21st floor accounting department moves between desks with the methodical pattern of someone reviewing files or processing paperwork. The person at the 39th floor window never moves, just stands there looking out at the city with what seems like infinite patience. I decide to investigate the 39th floor, partly because it's the most accessible from the elevator, partly because the stationary figure seems less threatening than the ones moving with such purpose through the corridors. The ride up gives me time to consider what I'm experiencing. The rational part of my mind catalogues possible explanations: equipment malfunction, sleep deprivation, stress from too many consecutive night shifts. But my body knows better. My pulse is elevated. My palms are damp, despite the building's consistent climate control. And every instinct I possess is telling me that something significant is happening here. The 39th floor houses the executive offices, with panoramic windows offering spectacular views of the city. During the day, it's the domain of senior management, filled with the quiet intensity of high-stakes decision-making. At night, It should be nothing but empty luxury, polished wood, leather furniture, and the distant glimmer of city lights through floor to ceiling windows. But as I step off the elevator, I hear something that makes me freeze. The soft murmur of conversation coming from the main conference room. The voices are indistinct, but clearly present multiple people engaged in what sounds like a serious discussion. I can't make out individual words, but the cadence is familiar, the rhythm of corporate meeting, complete with pauses for consideration and the occasional interjection of agreement or concern. I approach the conference room slowly, my flashlight beam dancing across the polished floor. The voices continue, growing slightly clearer as I get closer, though the words remain unintelligible. It's as if I'm hearing a conversation through water or thick glass, the meaning obscured, but the human intention unmistakable. The conference room door is closed but not locked. I place my hand on the handle and pause, listening. The conversation continues on the other side, involving what sounds like at least 4 or 5 people. Someone laughs, a brief, professional chuckle in response to what might have been a mild joke. I turn the handle and open the door. The room is empty. The long conference table sits surrounded by leather chairs, exactly as it should be. The city lights stream through the windows, casting in geometric patterns across the polished surface. But the voices have stopped, as if my entrance interrupted a meeting that exists just outside the range of normal perception. Yet the air in the room feels disturbed, as if people had just been sitting here, breathing, moving, occupying space in ways that leave traces even after they're gone. There's a warmth to the atmosphere that suggests recent human presence, and beneath that, the faint scent of expensive cologne and fresh coffee. I stand in the doorway for several minutes, waiting, listening. Gradually, the voices resume quieter now, more cautious, as if the speakers are aware of my presence and are adjusting their discussion accordingly. But I still can't see anyone. The room remains visibly empty, while obviously occupied. I return to my security station deeply unsettled. The monitors continue to show figures moving through the building. But now I understand that what I'm seeing is only a fragment of what's actually happening. There are meetings in progress, work being conducted, corporate life continuing on a schedule that doesn't align with normal business hours. Over the next several hours, I develop a theory that both explains and terrifies me. What if the building never really empties? What if the people who spend their days here leave so much of themselves behind, their ambitions, their stress, their dedication to their work, that echoes of their presence continue long after they've gone home? The shadows I'm seeing aren't intruders or malfunctions. They're imprints, psychic residue from thousands of hours of human activity concentrated in this vertical space. The late nights, the deadline pressure, the careers built and destroyed within these walls have created a kind of temporal overflow, bleeding through the boundaries between day and night, between presence and absence. But as the night progresses, I begin to suspect something even more disturbing. The figures aren't just echoes of past activity. They're current, present, engaged in work that seems to correspond to actual business being conducted somewhere in the building's corporate hierarchy. At 3:17 a.m., I witness something that confirms my fears. On monitor 23, I watch the figure at the 39th floor window finally move. It turns away from the city view and walks to what I know is Margaret Chen's old desk. It sits down, appears to open a laptop, and begins typing with the focused intensity of someone working on an important project. But Margaret Chen has been dead for 3 months. I race back up to the 39th floor, taking the stairs this time to avoid the delay of waiting for the elevator. By the time I reach the executive level, I'm breathing heavily, my heart pounding from both exertion and adrenaline. Margaret's office door is closed, but light seeps out from under it, not the harsh fluorescent emergency lighting, but the warm glow of a desk lamp. I can hear the soft clicking of keyboard keys, the occasional rustle of papers, and beneath it all, the almost subliminal sound of someone breathing while concentrating on detailed work. I try the door handle. It's locked, which shouldn't be possible. I have master keys to every office in the building. But when I insert my key, the lock refuses to turn. It's as if the mechanism has been changed, updated to deny me access to whatever meeting or work session is taking place inside. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, I can see movement, the shadow of someone sitting at the desk, occasionally reaching for what might be files or documents. The figure works with steady persistence, occasionally pausing to think before resuming its typing. I knock gently on the door. The typing stops immediately, followed by complete silence. After a long moment, the sound resumes, but more quietly now, as if whoever is inside is trying not to disturb me. Ms. Chen. I call out, feeling foolish but compelled to try. The building is closed. You'll need to badge out when you leave. The typing stops again. This time, the silence stretches longer, and I begin to feel that I'm being evaluated, considered by someone who is trying to decide how to respond to my presence. When the sound resumes, it's different, more urgent, as if the deadline has suddenly become more pressing. I stand outside the door for another 10 minutes, listening to the rhythm of intensive work being conducted by someone who shouldn't exist. Eventually, I return to my station, but the implications of what I'm witnessing begin to overwhelm me. If Margaret Chen is still working here 3 months after her death, what does that say about the nature of work itself? What does it mean when people become so absorbed in their professional lives that death becomes just another obstacle to overcome? The remaining hours of my shift pass in a blur of monitoring and dread. The figures continue their nocturnal activities, moving through floors, conducting meetings, working on projects that exist in the space between life and afterlife. I watch them on my monitors. These shadows of corporate dedication, and I begin to understand that they're not haunting the building. They're completing their assignments. At 4:45 a.m., I receive a phone call that shouldn't be possible. The caller ID shows Margaret Chen's office extension. I stare at the ringing phone for several seconds before answering. Security. "This is Margaret Chen," says a voice that sounds exactly like the woman I remember from my brief interactions with her during her final weeks. "I'm working late tonight and wanted to let you know I'll be here until around 6 a.m. Please make sure my access card remains active." The line goes dead before I can respond. Margaret Chen's access card was deactivated the day after her funeral. I personally watched the IT department remove her from all building systems. Yet according to my computer, her card has just been reactivated. and the system shows her as currently present in the building, logged in at 11:30 p.m., 3 hours before I first saw the shadow in her office. I check the building's other systems and discover something that makes my hands shake. Dozens of access cards belonging to former employees have been reactivated. People who quit, retired, or died are all showing as currently present in the building, their key cards active, their system access restored. The building isn't just occupied by shadows and echoes. It's occupied by the digital ghosts of everyone who ever worked here, their electronic identities resurrected to support whatever work they're conducting in the hours after normal business ends. At 5:30 a.m., I make a discovery that changes everything. While reviewing the night's access logs, I notice that my own entry into the building isn't recorded. According to the system, I never badged in for my shift. My key card shows as inactive. My employment status listed as terminated, with a date 3 weeks ago. But I remember coming to work. I remember badging in, settling into my station, beginning my shift. I have clear memories of the past 6 hours, of watching the monitors, of investigating the upper floors. Yet the building systems indicate that I don't work here anymore, that I haven't worked here for weeks. I check my wallet for my security ID badge. The photo is mine, the name is mine, but the expiration date shows that it expired a month ago. The magnetic stripe on the back is completely black, as if it's been demagnetized or somehow corrupted. With growing dread, I examine my reflection in one of the monitor screens. I look tired, pale, somewhat translucent in the fluorescent lighting. When I hold up my hand, I can see the monitors glow through my palm, as if my flesh has become partially transparent. The realization hits me like a physical blow. I'm not the security guard watching over the building's nighttime activities. I'm part of them. I died 3 weeks ago. Heart attack, probably. Or brought on by too many energy drinks and too much stress from working double shifts to pay for my certification program. But like Margaret Chen, like the other shadows moving through the floors above me, I couldn't let go of my work, my routine, my sense of professional responsibility. I've been coming to work every night since my death, badging into a system that no longer recognizes me, watching monitors that show the activities of other people who couldn't stop, working even after their lives ended. The building has become a kind of corporate afterlife, where the most dedicated employees continue their tasks in perpetuity, bound by commitment that transcends death itself. We punch our time cards with ghost badges, attend meetings that never end, work on projects that exist outside the normal flow of business time. As dawn approaches, I understand why I never see these figures during my physical investigations. We exist in parallel dimensions of the same space, the living building and the working afterlife occupying the same coordinates, but different phases of reality. The security monitors show us to each other because they're designed to capture movement and presence, not to distinguish between the living and the dead. To the cameras, we're all just employees going about our duties. I look around my security station, the chair I've been sitting in, the logbook I've been writing in, the coffee cup that never empties no matter how much I drink from it. All of it exists in this inn, between space where dedication and death intersect. The morning shift security guard will arrive soon, a living person who will see empty monitors an unoccupied station, and no record of anyone working through the night. He'll settle into the chair where my ghost has been sitting, start his own shift watching over a building he believes is empty during nighttime hours, but will still be here. Margaret will continue her project on the 39th floor. The accounting department will keep processing their eternal paperwork. The conference rooms will host meetings that discuss business strategies for a company that exists somewhere between profit and loss, between quarterly reports and final reports. And I'll keep watching the monitors, maintaining security for a building where the boundary between employment and eternity has blurred beyond recognition. My shift never ends. My vigilance never wavers, and somewhere in the space between paycheck and purpose, I'll continue to serve and protect until the building itself finally closes its doors for the last time. The sun rises over the city, casting long shadows through the glass facade of the Meridian Tower. Another night shift ends, another day begins, and we continue our work in the quiet spaces between living and dying, between clocking in and clocking out, forever and always on duty. Story 5. Roosevelt High School stands like a brick monument to education in the older part of town, its hallways having witnessed decades of teenage dreams and disappointments. During the day, it pulses with the chaotic energy of adolescence, locker doors slamming, sneakers squeaking on waxed floors, the constant murmur of young voices navigating the complexities of growing up. But at night, it becomes my domain, and I am its solitary guardian. My name is Frank Morrison, and I've been the night custodian here for 4 years. The work suits me, quiet hours, steady pay, and the satisfaction of maintaining order in a place where order is constantly challenged by the natural entropy of teenage life. I arrive each evening at 10 p.m., just as the last of the after-school activities wind down, and work until 6 a.m. When the morning staff begins to arrive, there's a meditative quality to the routine. I move through the building systematically, floor by floor, room by room, restoring each space to its proper state. Desks aligned, floors mopped, whiteboards cleaned, trash emptied. By dawn, Roosevelt High is ready for another day of controlled chaos, thanks to my solitary efforts during the silent hours. Tonight feels different from the moment I unlock the main entrance. The building seems to exhale as I step inside, as if it's been holding its breath all day and can finally relax now that the students have gone home. But there's something else in that exhalation, a whisper of presence that makes me pause in the main hallway, listening. The silence is complete but not empty. It has texture weight, as if the air itself is thick with memories of all the lives that have passed through these corridors. I've felt this before during my 4 years here, but tonight it's stronger, more pronounced. I begin my routine on the 3rd floor, working my way down. The science classrooms are always the most challenging beakers to wash, lab stations to sanitize, the lingering smell of chemical experiments to clear with industrial, strength air fresheners. As I work, my footsteps echo through the halls with the steady rhythm I've grown to love about night shift work. But tonight, there are other footsteps. At first, I dismiss them as echoes of my own movement, sound bouncing off the hard surfaces of institutional architecture. But as I pause to listen, the footsteps continue soft, cautious, with the distinctive squeak of rubber soles on freshly waxed floors. Someone is walking through the building. This isn't entirely unusual. Sometimes teachers forget things and return after hours, or administrators work late on important projects. The building has an alarm system, but it's often disarmed for staff who need after-hours access. I call out, "Hello, anyone there?" The footsteps stop immediately, followed by complete silence. I wait listening, but they don't resume. After a few minutes, I continue with my work, but remain alert for any further sounds of occupancy. 20 minutes later, I hear them again. This time, they're coming from the second floor, the same soft, squeaking pattern, moving with what sounds like casual familiarity through the corridors below me. I set down my mop and walk to the stairwell, listening carefully. The sounds are clearer now, not just footsteps, but the rustle of fabric, the soft thud of books being set down, the creak of a desk chair. Someone is definitely in the building, moving around as if they belong here. "Hello." I call again, my voice echoing down the stairwell. "School's closed. You need to sign in with security." But the sounds stop again. But this time I hear something else, a soft giggle, quickly stifled, as if someone is trying not to be heard. A student, probably. Some kid who stayed behind after activities and fell asleep in the library. Or maybe a couple looking for privacy away from parents and siblings. It happens occasionally, and part of my job is to gently escort stragglers off the premises. I make my way down to the second floor, following the corridor where I heard the sounds. This section houses the English and Social Studies departments, with classrooms opening off a main hallway lined with student lockers. The emergency lighting casts everything in a pale, institutional glow. "I know you're here," I say, keeping my tone friendly but firm. "I'm Frank, the custodian. You need to head home now, okay?" School's closed for the night. I check each classroom systematically, turning on lights, looking behind desks, and in supply closets. Room after room reveals nothing but empty desks arranged in neat rows, whiteboards covered with the residue of the day's lessons, bulletin boards decorated with student work. But in Mrs. Patterson's English classroom, I find something that makes me pause. A desk in the third row has been moved out of alignment with the others. The chair is pulled back as if someone had just been sitting there. And on the desktop is an open notebook with writing that appears fresh pencil marks that haven't had time to smudge or fade. I approach the desk carefully and read the writing. It's an essay, written in the careful cursive of a student trying to make a good impression. The ghost of Hamlet's father appears to warn his son about the betrayal that led to his death. But what if the ghost is not really there? What if Hamlet is imagining the whole conversation because he needs someone to blame for his father's death? Sometimes we see what we need to see, even when it isn't really there. The handwriting is neat, academic, but there's something old-fashioned about the letter formation. As if the writer learned cursive from a teacher who emphasized traditional penmanship. I look around the classroom for any sign of who might have been here, but find nothing. As I straighten the desk and close the notebook, I hear the footsteps again, this time in the hallway directly outside the classroom. They move past the doorway with unhurried confidence, accompanied by what sounds like soft conversation between two people. I rush to the doorway and look down the hall. Nothing. The corridor stretches empty in both directions, lit by the same pale emergency lighting. But the air still holds traces of recent presence. The faint scent of teenage perfume, the subtle warmth that lingers when people have just passed through a space. And underneath it all, something else, something like old paper and chalk dust. I continue my cleaning routine, but now I'm hyper-aware of every sound, every shifting shadow. The building feels occupied in a way that defies what I can see with my eyes. There's movement just outside my peripheral vision, conversations just below the threshold of understanding, presence that exists in the spaces between what I know and what I can prove. On the first floor, the phenomena intensify. As I work my way through the main hallway, I hear lockers opening and closing the distinctive metal-on-metal sound of students retrieving books and supplies. But when I investigate, every locker remains closed, their combinations locks undisturbed. In the cafeteria, I discover tables and chairs that have been rearranged into small conversational clusters, as if groups of friends had been sitting together, talking and laughing during what should be the silent hours of night. I remember arranging these tables in neat rows before leaving yesterday morning. But now they're configured for social interaction. As I restore them to their proper alignment, I hear something that makes my skin prickle. The sound of multiple conversations happening simultaneously, as if the cafeteria is full of students sharing lunch and gossip. The voices are indistinct, but unmistakably human, rising and falling with the natural rhythm of teenage social interaction. But I'm completely alone. The cafeteria is empty, lit only by my flashlight and the distant glow of exit signs. The voices continue as I work, creating a surreal backdrop to my solitary activities. Occasionally, I catch fragments that almost resolve into actual words discussions about tests and dates and weekend plans, but they remain tantalizingly just beyond comprehension. In the gymnasium, I find the basketball still bouncing. I discovered it on my first round through the building, sitting properly in the equipment storage area. But now it sits in the center of the court, slowly bouncing with a rhythm that suggests someone has just released it. The sound echoes through the large space, thump, 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 growing gradually softer, but never quite stopping. As I watch, the ball moves slightly, as if invisible hands are dribbling it in place. The movement is subtle but unmistakable, accompanied by the squeak of sneakers on the polished wooden floor. I approach the ball carefully, and it stops moving just before I reach it. When I pick it up, it feels warm, as if it's been in someone's hands. I place it back in the storage room and close the door firmly behind me. But as I leave the gymnasium, I hear it again, the sound of dribbling, now accompanied by what might be the soft thud of shots being attempted and missed. By 2 a.m., I'm no longer trying to rationalize what I'm experiencing. The building is occupied by students who aren't there, engaged in activities that shouldn't be happening. They attend classes, socialize in the cafeteria, play sports in the gymnasium, and use their lockers all during hours when the school should be empty. The realization comes gradually, built from small observations that accumulate into an undeniable conclusion. These aren't intruders or trespassers. They're students who belong here, who have always belonged here, continuing their education in the hours between day and night. In the library, I find the most compelling evidence. Books have been removed from shelves and left open on reading tables, their pages displaying passages that seem carefully selected. One book on American history is open to a chapter about students who died in the 1918 influenza pandemic. Another, a collection of poetry, displays a poem about memories that refuse to fade. But it's the yearbooks that provide the clearest picture of what's happening. The library's collection of Roosevelt High yearbooks dating back to 1923 has been disturbed, with several volumes lying open on different tables. Each one is turned to memorial pages sections dedicated to students who died during their high school years. Car accidents, illnesses, tragedies that cut young lives short and left empty desks in classrooms, silent voices in hallways that once echoed with their laughter. The names and faces from these memorial pages match the handwriting styles I've been finding, the activity patterns I've been observing. Jennifer Walsh, class of 1967, who died in a car accident 2 weeks before graduation. Her neat cursive matches the essay I found in Mrs. Patterson's classroom. Tommy Rodriguez, class of 1984, who succumbed to leukemia during his sophomore year. I recognize his dribbling pattern from the gymnasium. They're all here. These students whose educations were interrupted by death, but never truly ended. They continue attending classes, completing assignments, living the teenage experiences that were denied to them by circumstance and fate. As this understanding settles over me, the phenomena become more pronounced, as if my awareness has given them permission to be more visible. I see translucent figures moving through the halls, young people wearing clothing from different decades, carrying books from different eras, but all united by their connection to Roosevelt High School. They acknowledge me with shy smiles and nervous waves, the same way living students respond to adult authority figures. They're not frightening or malevolent. They're simply young people trying to complete their education under circumstances that defy conventional understanding. In the chemistry lab, I watch a girl from what appears to be the 1950s, her hair styled in victory rolls, her skirt reaching past her knees, carefully measure chemicals for an experiment she'll never finish. She works with intense concentration, occasionally referring to notes written in careful Palmer method script. In the art room, a boy wearing a tie, dyed shirt and bell, bottom jeans from the 1970s, paints a landscape that captures the view from the school's windows, but rendered in colors that suggest sunset or sunrise, the liminal times when different worlds intersect. Throughout the building, students from across the decades pursue their interrupted educations with the dedication of those who understand how precious and fragile the opportunity for learning truly is. But as dawn approaches, I begin to understand something else. I'm not just the custodian maintaining the building for these ghostly students. I'm becoming part of their story. The work has been getting harder lately. Not more difficult, but more tiring. I find myself moving more slowly, needing longer breaks, sometimes forgetting what I was doing or where I left my supplies. There have been mornings when I couldn't remember driving home, couldn't recall the transition between night shift and day sleep. My reflection in the classroom windows has been looking strange lately, paler, less substantial, as if I'm becoming translucent like the students I've been observing. When I check my time card this morning, I discover something that confirms my suspicions. I've been punching in for shifts I don't remember working, signing logs for maintenance I don't recall performing. According to the records, I've been here every night for 6 months, even though I only remember 4 years of employment. But looking more carefully at the employment records, I find the truth. Frank Morrison died of a heart attack in the school parking lot 2 years ago, at the end of what would have been his final shift. The official cause was stress and overwork, too many double shifts. Too much commitment to a job that didn't pay enough to justify the dedication he brought to it. Yet I'm still here, still maintaining the building, still ensuring that everything is clean and orderly for the next day's activities. Because even in death, I couldn't abandon my responsibility to Roosevelt High School and the students it serves. I've become part of the night shift that never ends, custodian to a student body that spans generations, maintaining a building that exists simultaneously in the present and the past. As the first light of dawn begins to filter through the tall windows, the ghostly students begin to fade, their translucent forms becoming even more ethereal as the boundary between night and day approaches. They gather their books, close their lockers, and file toward whatever dimension houses their continuing education. But they'll be back tomorrow night, and so will I. We have work to do, lessons to learn and teach, a building to maintain and occupy. Death has not ended our commitment to Roosevelt High School. It has simply moved us to the night shift, where dedication transcends the limitations of mortality. I complete my final rounds as dawn breaks over the city, ensuring that every classroom is ready for the living students who will arrive in a few hours. They'll sit at desks that were occupied by ghostly classmates just moments before, walk through hallways still echoing with the conversations of those who came before them. And tonight, when the sun sets and the building empties of its daytime occupants, will return. The students will continue their interrupted educations, and I'll continue maintaining the spaces where learning never truly ends, where the dedication to growth and knowledge proves stronger than the boundary between life and death. Roosevelt High School, where some students graduate, some students transfer, and some students simply move to the night shift, continuing their education in the quiet hours. When the building belongs to those who love it, too much to ever truly leave. Story 6. The fluorescent lights hum their familiar tune above my head as I make my rounds through the underground parking garage. It's 2:47 a.m., and the concrete tomb beneath the city sleeps in its artificial twilight. My footsteps echo in measured beats. Left, right, left, right. A metronome keeping time with the rhythm of another sleepless night. I've been working this security job for 8 months now. 8 months of walking these same painted lines, checking the same empty spaces, watching the same shadows dance between the support pillars. The pay is decent enough, and the solitude suits me. Most nights, nothing happens. Most nights, I count my steps, check my watch, and wait for dawn to filter down through the garage entrance. But there's something about space 247. It started 3 weeks ago, though I'm beginning to wonder if it started much earlier than that. Memory has a way of playing tricks when you work the graveyard shift. Days blur into nights, and nights stretch into something that isn't quite morning. Time becomes elastic, unreliable. I remember the first time I noticed it clearly. I was doing my 3 a.m. walkthrough, flashlight beam cutting through the perpetual dusk of level B2. The light swept across the rows of parked cars. A silver sedan, a red SUV, an empty space, a blue compact. My feet carried me forward in their familiar pattern, the rubber soles of my security shoes, squeaking softly against the polished concrete. Then I stopped. Space 247 wasn't empty. There was a car there, black sedan, maybe a Honda or Toyota, the kind of unremarkable vehicle that blends into traffic like water into water. 4 doors, tinted windows, license plate that seemed to blur when I tried to focus on it. Nothing unusual about it, except for one thing. I'd walked past that space 20 minutes earlier. It had been empty. I stood there for what felt like hours, though my watch insisted only minutes had passed. The car sat in perfect alignment within the painted lines, as if it had always been there, as if I had somehow missed it during my previous rounds, though I knew that space had been empty. My flashlight beam trembled slightly as I approached. The metal was cool under the artificial lights, the paint job pristine. I walked around the vehicle slowly, professionally. No signs of forced entry into the garage. No tire tracks on the concrete. The car simply existed, occupying space 247 as naturally as shadow occupies the absence of light. I made a note in my logbook of 3:15 a.m. vehicle in space 247. No corresponding entry in overnight parking log. When I returned an hour later, the space was empty again. That should have been the end of it. A simple mistake, perhaps. Someone with legitimate access parking for a brief visit, departing before my next round. These things happen. The city breathes even in its sleep, and sometimes that breath finds its way into the deep places. But the car returned the next night, same time, sometime between my 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. rounds. Same black sedan, same blurred license plate, same perfect positioning within the painted boundaries of space 247. This time I tried the door handles. Locked, of course. The windows were too tinted to see inside, reflecting only my own face staring back, pale and uncertain in the fluorescent glow. I called it in to my supervisor. Just wanted to report a possible parking violation on B2. I said, my voice echoing in the empty security office. Space 247. Vehicle with unclear authorization, 2247, came the crackling response through my radio. Check the system. Run the plate. But when I tried to read the license plate again, the letters and numbers seemed to shift, rearranging themselves like alphabet soup stirred by an invisible spoon. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, blamed the late hour and the strange light. When I looked again, the car was gone. Never mind, I radioed back. Must have been authorized after all. The laughter from the other end of the radio carried a note I didn't recognize. Gets you sometimes, doesn't it? The night shift makes you see things. But I wasn't seeing things. Or rather, I was seeing one very specific thing, and that thing kept returning to space 247 with increasing regularity. Night after night, it appeared, always between my rounds, always in perfect alignment, always gone by the time I could properly document it. I began varying my patrol schedule, trying to catch the moment of arrival or departure. I set up a folding chair across from space 247 during my meal break, watching the empty space with the dedication of a bird watcher hoping for a rare species. Nothing. the space remained stubbornly vacant whenever I observed it directly, only during my walking rounds. When my attention was divided among 100 different responsibilities, would I discover the black sedan waiting in its designated spot like a patient appointment? I started timing my walks. 3 minutes from the B1 level down to B2. 2 minutes to walk the perimeter of B2. 30 seconds to traverse the row containing space 247. In that 30-second window, somehow, a car appeared and disappeared without trace. The impossibility of it should have driven me away, should have sent me looking for a different job, different hours, different shadows to patrol. Instead, it drew me deeper into the rhythm of the night. I began to anticipate the car's appearances, looking forward to that moment of discovery when I would round the corner and find space 247 occupied by its mysterious visitor. The sedan became part of my routine, as predictable as the humming lights and the squeaking of my shoes. I found myself nodding to it when I passed, the way one might acknowledge a regular neighbor. Evening, I would whisper to the tinted windows, and sometimes, though this might have been my imagination, I thought I heard the subtle creak of suspension responding, as if someone inside had shifted their weight in acknowledgement. It was during my 4th week of encounters that I noticed the changes in my logbook. I had been meticulous in my documentation, recording each sighting with professional precision. Time of discovery, duration of observation, any notable details. But when I flipped back through my entries, looking for patterns, I found something disturbing. According to my own handwriting, a space 247 had been continuously occupied for the past month. Not intermittently, not between my rounds, continuously. Every entry in my own careful script noted the presence of the black sedan. 3:15 a.m. vehicle in space 247. Ongoing presence confirmed. Or 4:20 a.m. space 247 occupied as usual. 2:45 a.m. regular vehicle in designated position. But that couldn't be right. I remembered the empty space. I remembered the moments of discovery, the surprise of finding the car where none had been before. My memories felt solid, real, more trustworthy than the evidence of my own pen. I tore out a page from the logbook and started fresh. This time, I would document only the truth as I experienced it. Space 247 tray empty during direct observation, occupied during routine patrols. A quantum car that existed only when unobserved, collapsing into non-existence under the weight of attention. But when I wrote Space 247 empty in clear block letters, the ink seemed to shimmer and rearrange itself. The words reformed, occupied. I tried again, pressing harder with the pen. No, car 147. The letters twisted, melted, became BLAK Sediment 247. My hands shook as I closed the logbook. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless song above my head, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the subtle whisper of air moving through the ventilation system. Normal sounds, comforting sounds, the sounds of a world that followed rules, where cause preceded effect and observations remained consistent. That night, I decided to test the boundaries of my situation. Instead of following my usual patrol route, I positioned myself at the corner leading to row 12, where space 247 waited in its eternal patience. I would watch the space continuously, never looking away, never allowing the car its moment of mysterious materialization. For 2 hours, I stared at the empty parking space. My eyes watered from the strain, and my neck ached from holding the same position, but I maintained my vigil. Space 247 remained empty. Stubbornly, reassuringly empty. At 4 a.m. exactly, I blinked. It wasn't intentional. The human eye blinks automatically. A physiological necessity that occurs every few seconds without conscious control. This blink lasted perhaps a quarter of a second, the briefest interruption of vision. When my eyes opened, the black sedan was there. Not arriving, not materializing, simply there, as if it had always been there, as if our vigil had been a delusion, and the car had been my constant companion throughout the night. The tinted windows reflected my pale face, and in that reflection, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. I looked tired, more than tired. I looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than missing sleep. There were shadows under my eyes that seemed too dark for the fluorescent lighting. And my skin had a waxy quality that suggested months of underground living, rather than the 8 months I'd actually worked here. How long had I been watching Space 247? The question formed in my mind like a crack in glass, spreading and branching until I couldn't ignore it. According to my memory, I'd first noticed the car 3 weeks ago. According to my logbook, the car had been appearing for a month. But according to my reflection in those tinted windows, I looked like someone who had been asking the same questions for much longer than either timeline suggested. I walked closer to the sedan, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the concrete silence. The car seemed solid enough. Real metal, real glass, real rubber tires touching real pavement. But when I pressed my palm against the hood, expecting to feel either warmth from recent driving or coolness from long parking, I felt nothing. Not warmth, not coolness. Not even the texture of paint or metal. My hand encountered a surface that was somehow temperature, neutral, as if the car existed at exactly the same degree as my own body heat. "Hello," I said aloud, my voice cracking slightly from dessous. I hadn't spoken to another human being during my shift in... When was the last time? The radio had been quiet for days, or weeks, or perhaps longer. When had I last called in a report? The car sat silent, but silence in an underground parking garage is never complete. There are always the humming lights, the whisper of air circulation, the distant rumble of city traffic far above. Tonight, though, I became aware of another sound, soft, rhythmic like breathing. I pressed my ear against the driver's side window, trying to locate the source of the sound. The glass was cool against my skin, and through it, I could hear something that might have been respiration, slow, steady breaths that seemed to match the rhythm of my own heartbeat. "Is someone in there?" I asked, though I could see nothing through the tinted glass except my own distorted reflection. The breathing continued, patient and measured. I tried the door handle again, knowing it would be locked, but this time it turned smoothly in my hand. The door opened with a soft click, and the interior light illuminated an empty cabin. Empty, but still breathing. The sound was clearer now. Definitely the rhythm of lungs filling and emptying. I slid into the driver's seat, hands automatically finding the steering wheel, feet settling onto pedals that felt familiar beneath my shoes. The breathing surrounded me now, coming from the seats, the dashboard, the air itself. It was only then that I realized the breathing was my own. I had been holding my breath since opening the door, but the sound continued, as if the car was breathing for me, or as if I was breathing for the car. The distinction seemed less important than the communion, the shared rhythm of existence between observer and observed, guard and guarded, the watcher and the watched. On the seat beside me lay a security logbook, identical to my own except for one detail. Every entry, in handwriting I recognized as mine, but couldn't remember producing, documented the same thing. Space 247, guard on duty. Not a car, a guard. I flipped through the pages, months of entries stretching back further than my employment, further than my memory, recording the faithful presence of a guard in space 247. Sometimes the handwriting looked fresh, as if written moments ago. Sometimes it looked faded, weathered by time I couldn't account for. Outside the car, I could see myself standing at the corner of row 12, watching space 20447 with the patient dedication of someone who had been waiting far longer than 3 weeks. The fluorescent lights cast shadows that seemed too long for their sources, and in those shadows, other figures stood their own vigils. Security guards watching empty spaces that had once contained something important enough to guard. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I was standing outside the car, looking at an empty driver's seat. My logbook was in my hand, open to a fresh page. The pen felt heavy as I wrote, 4:30 a.m., space 247 occupied, all secure. The words appeared in my familiar handwriting, though I couldn't remember forming the letters. Above me, the fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song, and somewhere in the distance, the city breathed in its sleep. I began my next round, feet moving in their measured rhythm across the concrete. Left, right, left. Behind me, space 247 waited in its patient silence, ready for the next guard to discover what had always been there, what would always be there, in the space between observation and memory. The night stretched ahead, and I walked deeper into its embrace, counting my steps and watching the shadows, guardian of the spaces that guarded me in return. Story 7. The convenience store glows like a beacon in the darkness, its fluorescent lights painting the empty parking lot in harsh white rectangles. From 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., this place becomes my world. A 24-hour island of artificial day floating in the city's sleeping hours. The automatic doors whisper open and closed with each late night customer, and the coolers hum their mechanical lullabies while I stock shelves and count register drawers and wait for morning. My name is Sarah, though the customers who shuffle in during my shift rarely ask. To them, I'm just the girl behind the counter, the one who rings up their energy drinks and cigarettes and lottery tickets without making eye contact. 8 months of night shifts have taught me that people don't want conversation at 3 a.m. They want efficiency, anonymity, and the strange comfort of a place that never closes. The store feels different after midnight, smaller somehow, as if the darkness outside presses against the windows and compresses the space within. The aisles seem longer, the shadows between the shelves deeper. Even the sounds change. The buzz of the freezers becomes more pronounced. The tick of the wall clock grows louder, and every footstep on the linoleum floor echoes with a hollow ring that doesn't quite belong. It was during my 3rd month on the job that I first noticed the discrepancy. I had developed a routine of reviewing the security footage during slow periods, partly for safety and partly to fight the monotony of the night shift. The store has 6 cameras positioned strategically throughout the building. One behind the register, two covering the main aisles, one watching the entrance, one monitoring the refrigerated section, and one focused on the back storage area. On quiet nights, when customers were few and far between, I would cycle through the camera feeds on the small monitor beside the register, watching the empty store from different angles. It was oddly soothing, like viewing my workspace from outside myself, seeing the familiar space rendered in the flat, colorless tones of security footage. That's when I began to notice the gaps. It started with small inconsistencies. I would remember serving a customer, a man in a baseball cap buying coffee and a newspaper. But when I reviewed the footage from that time period, the cameras showed only empty aisles and an unattended register. I would recall the sound of the automatic doors, the rustle of newspaper pages, the clink of coins on the counter, but the footage captured none of it. At first, I assumed it was a technical problem. Security systems malfunction, hard drives develop errors, cameras occasionally fail to record. I made a note to mention it to the day manager, though I kept forgetting to bring it up during our brief handover meetings. The day shift felt like a different world entirely, populated by people who belonged to the sunlight hours, and my concerns about nighttime footage seemed irrelevant in that bright, bustling context. But the gaps continued to appear, not with every customer, but with enough frequency to establish a pattern. Some people registered normally on all 6 cameras. I could track their progress from the entrance through the aisles to the counter and back out again. Others seemed to exist in a blind spot that followed them wherever they went, moving through the store like ghosts that left impressions only in my memory. I started keeping detailed notes of each interaction, timestamps, descriptions, purchases made. When I compared these notes to the security footage, the mismatches became impossible to ignore. According to the cameras, I spent large portions of my shift talking to empty air, ringing up sales to invisible customers making change for phantom transactions. The register totals told a different story. Every morning when I counted the till, the numbers matched perfectly with my written logs. Cash, credit card transactions, even the lottery ticket sales. Everything balanced to the penny. If the cameras were right, and I was hallucinating customers, then I was also hallucinating money, and that money was somehow becoming real enough to satisfy the daily reconciliation. The contradiction kept me awake during my daytime sleeping hours. I would lie in bed with blackout curtains drawn, trying to make sense of what I was experiencing. Memory is unreliable, especially during night shifts when exhaustion can play tricks on perception. But financial records don't lie, and the register drawer continued to balance every morning with mathematical precision. I decided to conduct an experiment. During my next shift, I would pay extra attention to every customer interaction, making detailed notes in real time rather than relying on memory. I set up a small notebook beside the register and documented each sale as it happened. Time, items purchased, payment method, customer description. Then I would immediately check the corresponding security footage to see if the cameras captured what I had just experienced. The first few customers of the night appeared normally on all 6 feeds. A teenager buying energy drinks, an elderly woman purchasing cat food, a construction worker getting coffee and pastries for his crew. I could track their movements from entry to exit, watch myself serve them from the overhead camera angle, see the transactions unfold in the grainy black and white footage. But at 2:17 a.m., a woman entered the store. I noticed her immediately. Tall, wearing a dark coat, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who knew exactly what they wanted. She walked directly to the refrigerated section, selected a bottle of water and a sandwich, then approached the counter. Her voice was soft, but clear as she asked for a pack of cigarettes from the display behind me. Marlboro Lights, she said, placing exact change on the counter. And thank you for staying open all night. It makes a difference to people like me. The interaction felt completely normal, even pleasant. She smiled when I handed her the plastic bag, and I found myself smiling back. A genuine expression of human connection in the isolated hours of the night shift. The automatic doors whispered shut behind her, and I made my notes. 2:17 a.m., adult female, dark coat, water, sandwich, cigarettes. Cash payment, friendly demeanor. When I checked the security footage, the cameras showed me standing alone behind the register, staring at empty space and moving my lips as if in conversation. The overhead angle captured me reaching for cigarettes that remained on the shelf, ringing up items that didn't appear on the counter, placing invisible merchandise into a bag that looked empty in my hands. But the register showed a sale of $12.47, and when I counted the cash drawer, the money was there. I rewound the footage and watched it again, hoping to spot some technical glitch or camera blind spot that could explain the discrepancy. The timestamp matched my notes exactly, and I could see myself performing all the motions of a normal transaction. But the woman in the dark coat existed only in my memory and in the balanced accounts of the register. This should have frightened me. The rational response would have been to call my manager, request a schedule change, or quit entirely. Instead, I felt a strange sense of curiosity, as if I had discovered a secret room in a familiar building. The night shift had always felt separate from the daylight world. Now I was learning just how separate it truly was. Over the following weeks, I began to recognize patterns in the invisible customers. Some came regularly, like the woman in the dark coat who appeared every few nights around 2:17 a.m. Others were one-time visitors, passing through like travelers on a journey I couldn't comprehend. They all shared certain characteristics. They were polite. They knew exactly what they wanted, and they paid in exact change with bills and coins that materialized in my register drawer, despite being invisible to the security cameras. I started to look forward to these encounters. The invisible customers were often more pleasant than the regular ones, more likely to say thank you, less likely to complain about prices or store policies. They treated me like a person rather than a service provider, asking about my shift, commenting on the weather, sometimes even sharing brief stories about their lives. Working late again. Asked the man who came in every Tuesday at 3:33 a.m. for coffee and a newspaper. The cameras never saw him, but I knew him by his voice, deep and slightly hoarse, as if he'd been talking all day. He always left a 50-cent tip on the counter, coins that appeared real enough to add to my pocket change. "Someone has to," I would reply, and he would laugh, a sound that seemed to echo longer than the acoustics of the store should have allowed. "We appreciate it." he would say. More than you know. The conversations became the highlight of my shift, while the visible customers remained hurried and impersonal. The invisible ones offered connection, recognition, the simple acknowledgement that I existed as something more than a transaction processor. They asked about my studies. I was taking community college classes during the day and remembered details from previous conversations in a way that made me feel seen. It wasn't until my 6th month on the night shift that I thought to check the customer count on the automatic door sensor. Every time the front doors opened, a mechanical counter advanced by one number, tracking the total number of entries and exits for inventory and security purposes. The day manager used these numbers to calculate foot traffic patterns and plan staffing schedules. If I was experiencing hallucinations, the door counter should have remained unchanged during my phantom transactions. But when I cross-referenced my interaction logs with the door counter readings, the numbers matched perfectly. Every customer I served, visible or invisible to the cameras, registered as an entry and exit on the mechanical counter. The store was tracking visitors that the security system couldn't see. This discovery led to another question. If the invisible customers were real enough to trigger the door sensors and leave money in the register, where were they going when they left the store? I started watching the parking lot more carefully during my shifts, paying attention to vehicle arrivals and departures. The visible customers were easy to track. I could see them walk to their cars, watch them drive away under the parking lot lights. But during the times when invisible customers visited, the parking lot appeared empty to my direct observation, though I could sometimes hear the distant sounds of car doors closing and engines starting. One night, during a particularly slow shift, I decided to step outside after serving an invisible customer. The woman in the dark coat had just left. 2:17 a.m., as always, and I could hear footsteps on the pavement outside. The automatic doors had registered her exit, and somewhere in the darkness, beyond the store's fluorescent glow, a car door opened and closed with a distinctive metallic thunk. I propped open the front door and stepped into the cool night air, looking around the empty parking lot. The sounds were clearer out here. I could hear an engine turning over, the quiet rumble of a car idling, the soft whisper of tires on asphalt, but I saw nothing except empty spaces under the parking lot lights. Then, at the edge of my vision, I caught a glimpse of movement. It wasn't quite like seeing a car, more like seeing the space where a car should be, outlined by the absence of reflection on the wet pavement. As I watched, this invisible presence backed out of a parking space and moved toward the street, its path marked by the subtle displacement of rainwater and the faint depression of tires on asphalt. I followed the invisible vehicle's progress until it merged with the late night traffic on the main road, becoming indistinguishable from all the other cars I couldn't quite see in the darkness. When I returned to the store, the automatic door counter had advanced by one, recording my exit and re-entry, but somehow not registering the departure it had just witnessed. That night, I made a new entry in my log, 2:25 a.m., observed departure of invisible vehicle, customer count consistent with door sensor readings, store functions normally despite camera blind spots. As I wrote, I realized that my own handwriting looked different under the fluorescent lights. The letters seemed slightly faded, as if written with a pen that was running out of ink, though I had just changed the refill that morning. When I held the page up to the light, the words appeared normal, but in the indirect glow of the store's ambient lighting, they seemed translucent, barely visible against the white paper. I walked over to the security monitor and cycled through the camera feeds, looking for my own image behind the register. The overhead camera showed an empty counter. No sign of the person who should have been standing there moments before. I waved at the camera, but my reflection failed to appear on the monitor. According to the security system, the store was completely unattended, though the register remained balanced, and the door sensors continued to track the customers who sought the services I apparently wasn't there to provide. The realization came gradually, like walking into deeper water, until you suddenly understand you can no longer touch the bottom. I wasn't serving invisible customers. I was the invisible one. Somehow, during my months of night shifts, I had crossed over into the same space, occupied by the woman in the dark coat, the man who bought newspapers, or the polite customers who paid in exact change and left no trace on the security cameras. We were all part of the same nocturnal ecosystem, the night shift that served the night shift, the 24-hour service that operated in the hours between hours. The day shift still happened. I could see evidence of it when I arrived each evening, fresh stock on the shelves, different configurations of promotional displays, the lingering scent of different cleaning products. But I no longer belonged to that visible world, if I ever had. My college classes felt increasingly dreamlike, interactions with professors and classmates becoming vague and indistinct. Even my sleep during the daylight hours seemed less like rest and more like a pause between the real activities that took place after dark. I had become a ghost in my own life, and the strange thing was how natural it felt. The night shift made sense now. The isolation, the disconnection from normal human schedules, the gradual fading of relationships with friends and family. It wasn't just the cost of working unusual hours. It was a transformation, a slow transition into a parallel existence that operated according to different rules. I still serve customers every night, the invisible ones who understand what it means to exist in the spaces between official acknowledgement. We take care of each other in small ways, exact change, polite conversation, the recognition that we all share the burden and privilege of keeping the lights on while the visible world sleep. Sometimes, during the quietest hours before dawn, I catch glimpses of other night workers in the security footage, figures moving through other stores, other offices, other 24-hour establishments throughout the city. We're all there, taking care of business that officially doesn't exist, serving customers who officially aren't present, maintaining the infrastructure of the hours that don't appear on anyone's schedule. The register still balances every morning. The doors still count our comings and goings. The city still receives the services it needs, even if it can't see who provides them. I've stopped checking the security footage. The cameras capture what they were designed to capture. The official version of events, the visible world with its documented interactions and recorded transactions. But the real work happens in the spaces between pixels, in the moments between frames, in the night shift that serves the other night shift, My shift ends at 7 a.m. When the day manager arrives and the store returns to its official existence, I count the register one final time, noting with satisfaction that everything balances perfectly, as it always does. Then I walk out into the morning light, becoming less visible with each step away from the fluorescent glow of the convenience store. By the time I reach my car, I'm translucent. By the time I start the engine, I'm transparent. By the time I merge with the morning traffic, I'm just another invisible commuter heading home from work that officially doesn't exist. Tonight, I'll return to the store, and the fluorescent lights will welcome me back into their embrace. The automatic doors will count my arrival. The register will await my balanced accounting, and the invisible customers will continue their patient visits, secure in the knowledge that someone like them is there to serve their needs. We are the night shift that never ends, the service that operates in the margins of official time, and tomorrow night, and the night after that, will be there again, taking care of the business that keeps the world running while it sleeps. Story 8. The elevator buttons gleam like yellow eyes in the dim lighting of the corporate tower's lobby. Floors 1 through 12, basement, and the maintenance access that requires a special key I've never seen. 27 years I've been the night security guard for Meridian Financial, and I know every button, every floor, every corner of this building like the lines on my weathered hands. My name is Frank Morrison, and my routine is carved in stone. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week, walking the same halls, checking the same doors, ensuring that nothing disturbs the slumber of commerce. The building settles around me like an old coat, familiar and comfortable despite its size. 43 floors of offices, conference rooms, and executive suites, all sleeping peacefully under the watch of an old man with arthritic knees and reading glasses held together with electrical tape. The elevator system is digital now, has been for 15 years, with bright LED displays that show the current floor in crisp, modern numerals. During the day, the elevators run constantly, ferrying employees and visitors between floors with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. At night, they rest in the lobby, doors closed, waiting for my rounds or the occasional late, working executive who needs access to the upper floors. I have a key card that grants me access to every floor except the 43rd, which houses the server room and requires dual authorization from the IT director and building management. My rounds follow a simple pattern basement to 42nd floor, checking each level systematically, then back down to start the cycle again. 3 complete circuits per shift, with longer breaks between rounds during the quiet hours after midnight. It was during my Tuesday night shift 3 weeks ago that I first noticed the anomaly. I was completing my fun AM round, riding elevator car number 3 up from the 38th floor, when I glanced at the floor indicator and saw something that made me question my tired eyes. The display read 13 in bright blue digits, but according to my position in the building, I should have been passing floor 39. I pressed the button for 39, thinking perhaps the elevator had malfunctioned and stopped on the wrong floor. But when the doors opened, I found myself looking at the familiar 39th floor lobby, executive offices with their polished wooden doors and photographs of company founders lining the walls. The floor indicator still read 13, even as I stepped out into what was clearly the 39th floor. I made a note in my security log, 1:15 a.m. Elevator 3 display malfunction. Shows floor 13 while actually on floor 39. Maintenance required. But when I returned to the lobby and looked at my log entry, the words had changed. In my own handwriting, the note read 1:15 a.m. Elevator 3 functioning normally. Floor indicators accurate. I stared at the page, certain that I had written something different. But the ink was my blue Bic pen. The handwriting was unmistakably mine, and the paper showed no signs of erasure or alteration. Memory plays tricks on tired minds, especially during night shifts, and I decided to chalk it up to exhaustion. The next night, I paid closer attention to the elevator displays during my rounds. Floors 1 through 12 showed normally, their numbers ascending in the logical sequence I had followed thousands of times before. But as I continued upward, I began to notice inconsistencies. The elevator would show floor 15, while I was clearly on floor 26. Floor 8 would appear when I was riding between 30 and 31. The numbers seemed random, unconnected to the actual floors I was visiting. Yet each floor I stepped onto was exactly where it should be. The 20th floor contained the marketing department offices. The 35th floor housed the legal team. The 41st floor was executive conference rooms and the corner offices of the senior partners. The building remained consistent, even if the elevator displays had developed minds of their own. I began tracking the discrepancies, noting which actual floor corresponded to which display number. The pattern that emerged was disturbing in its consistency. Every elevator in the building was now showing floor 13 more than any other number, not exclusively 13. That would have been too obvious, too easily dismissed as a simple malfunction. Instead, the floor 13 appeared roughly 60% of the time, regardless of which actual floor the elevator was serving. I could ride from the basement to the 42nd floor, and the display would show floor 13 during most of the journey, occasionally flickering to show other numbers before settling back to its preferred digit. The building has never had a 13th floor. This is common in commercial construction, a superstitious quirk that skips from floor 12 directly to floor 14, avoiding the number that makes tenants uncomfortable and property values uncertain. I had worked in this building for over 2 decades, and I knew its layout as well as I knew my own apartment. 12 floors, then 14, 15, 16, and so on up to 43. No 13th floor had ever existed here, but the elevators insisted otherwise. During my 3rd week of documenting the anomaly, I decided to test the system directly, instead of simply riding the elevators during my normal rounds. I would press the button for each floor and verify that the elevator took me where I expected to go. If the display showed floor 13, I would note which actual floor the doors opened onto. I started with elevator car number 1, pressing the button for floor 5. The elevator rose smoothly, and when it stopped, the display showed 13 in bright blue numerals. The doors opened onto the 5th floor. Accounting department, beige carpeting, motivational posters about teamwork and excellence. I stepped out to confirm the floor directory mounted beside the elevators. Floor 5, accounting, payroll, human resources, The elevator display continued to insist I was on floor 13. I returned to the elevator and pressed the button for floor 18. Again, the display showed 13 when the doors opened onto the 18th floor. Regional sales offices with their glass, walled conference rooms and mounted flat screen monitors showing stock prices and market updates. The floor directory confirmed I was on 18, but the elevator remained convinced I had never left 13. This pattern continued throughout my experiment. No matter which floor I selected, no matter which elevator car I used, the display showed floor 13 approximately 60% of the time. The floors themselves remained exactly as they should be. The right offices, the right layouts, the right identifying signage. But according to the elevator system, I was spending most of my time on a floor that didn't exist. I began to wonder what would happen if I actually tried to visit floor 13. The button for 13 didn't exist on the elevator panel, of course. The row of buttons skipped from 12 to 14, as it always had. But late one night, during the quiet hours when the building felt most isolated from the waking world, I found myself staring at that gap between 12 and 14, wondering what would happen if I pressed the space where 13 should be. The elevator panels are touch, sensitive, with raised buttons that click satisfyingly when pressed. I ran my finger along the space between 12 and 14, feeling only smooth metal with no button or sensor. But as I touched that empty space, the elevator lurched slightly, as if responding to a command. The floor display immediately changed to 13, and the elevator began to rise. I hadn't pressed any button. I had simply touched the space where a button might have been, and the elevator had interpreted the touch as a valid destination. My stomach tightened as I watched the floor counter hold steady at 13, even as I felt the elevator continuing to ascend. When the doors opened, I found myself looking at something impossible. It was a floor I had never seen before, despite 27 years in this building. The layout was similar to the others. A central elevator lobby with hallways branching off in 4 directions. But everything was subtly wrong. The carpeting was a shade of gray that didn't match any other floor in the building. The wall color was an off-white that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The ceiling fixtures were identical to those on every other floor, but they hummed with a frequency that made my teeth ache. The directory beside the elevator was blank, not removed, not damaged, simply blank, as if it had been manufactured without any text or department listings. The metal plate was mounted in the exact position where directories appeared on every other floor, but its surface was smooth and featureless, reflecting the sickly light from the overhead fixtures. I stepped out of the elevator, my security boots silent on the gray carpeting. The hallways stretched away from the central lobby, lined with doors that bore no numbers, no nameplates, no indication of what lay behind them. The silence was complete. No hum of ventilation systems, no distant traffic noise from the street below, no electronic buzzing from computers or phones. I walked down the north corridor, noting that the doors were identical to those on every other floor. The same brushed steel handles, the same frosted glass panels, the same corporate aesthetic that marked this building as thoroughly modern and professionally managed. But when I tried the handles, every door was locked. and the frosted glass revealed nothing of the spaces beyond. At the end of the corridor, I found a fire exit door with a small window at eye level. Through the glass, I could see the city stretching away below me, lights twinkling in the darkness, traffic moving along the familiar streets. The view corresponded roughly to what I would expect from the 13th floor, if such a floor existed, higher than the 12th floor perspective I knew, but lower than the 14th floor view from the marketing department. I was looking at the city from a floor that shouldn't exist, in a building that had never contained it. The rational part of my mind insisted that this was impossible. Buildings don't spontaneously generate new floors. Elevator systems don't transport people to spaces that aren't there. What I was experiencing had to be a hallucination, a breakdown in perception, brought on by years of night shift work and the isolation of walking empty halls in the small hours of morning. But the floor felt solid under my feet. The air had weight and temperature. When I touched the walls, they were cool and smooth, with the texture of painted drywall over steel studs. Every sensory input confirmed that I was standing in a real place, even if that place violated the architectural impossibility of its existence. I walked back to the elevator, noting that my footsteps left faint impressions in the gray carpeting, as if the fibers were designed to remember the passage of visitors. The elevator doors stood open, waiting patiently for my return, and when I stepped back into the car, I felt a subtle shift in air pressure, as if I was moving between two spaces with different atmospheric conditions. I pressed the button for the lobby, but nothing happened. The floor display continued to show 13, and the elevator remained motionless. I tried other floors, 5, 18, 31, but the buttons seemed to have lost their responsiveness. Only when I touched the space between 12 and 14 did the elevator respond, dropping rapidly toward the ground floor. When the doors opened in the lobby, I checked my watch and discovered that 3 hours had passed. According to my timepiece, I had been exploring floor 13 for nearly the entire remainder of my shift. But in my memory, the visit had lasted perhaps 20 minutes. A brief walk through the corridors, a look out the fire exit window, a confused return to the elevator. Time had stretched or compressed around that impossible floor, and I had lost track of its passage. I made my final security log entry of the shift. 5:47 a.m., all floors checked and secured. Building systems functioning normally. But as I wrote those words, I could feel their inadequacy. Nothing about this building was functioning normally. The elevator system was showing floors that didn't exist, transporting visitors to spaces that violated the fundamental architecture of the structure. And somehow, I had become complicit in maintaining the fiction that everything was exactly as it should be. The next night, I returned to work with a digital camera, determined to document what I had experienced. If floor 13 truly existed, I would photograph it, creating evidence that couldn't be dismissed as the fantasy of an overworked security guard. The camera was small enough to fit in my shirt pocket, with enough memory to capture dozens of high-resolution images. But when I tried to reach floor 13 again, touching the space between 12 and 14, nothing happened. The elevator responded normally, taking me to whichever floor. I selected with boring efficiency. The display showed the correct floor numbers, and my rounds proceeded without incident. I spent the entire shift attempting to recreate the conditions that had allowed me to visit the 13th floor. Different elevator cars, different times, different combinations of button presses. Nothing worked. According to every measurement I could make, floor 13 had returned to non-existence, leaving me with only memory as evidence of my impossible visit. But during my final round of the night, as I rode elevator car number 3 from the 40th floor down to the lobby, something changed in the reflection of the elevator doors. The polished steel surfaces of the doors act as mirrors, showing distorted images of the elevator's interior. Normally, I would see myself, a tall, slightly overweight man in a security uniform, looking tired after a long night of walking empty hallways. But in the reflection, I saw something else. I saw myself standing in the gray, carpeted lobby of floor 13, looking out through the elevator doors at the familiar interior of elevator car number 3. The reflection showed me on the impossible floor, while my physical body rode the elevator down through the existing building. For a moment, I existed in both spaces simultaneously, connected by the silvered surface of the elevator doors. The reflection, me was not alone. Behind him, behind me, other figures stood in the gray lobby of floor 13. Security guards in uniforms similar to mine, but from different eras, different companies. A woman in a blue blazer with a name tag that read Meridian Financial. Night Security 1987-2003. A younger man in a brown uniform that predated the current corporate color scheme by at least a decade. An elderly guard whose badge identified him as working for a company I didn't recognize, though his face was familiar in a way that suggested I had seen his photograph in some old personnel files. They all looked tired, the way night shift workers always look tired, but their expressions held a quality of patient waiting, as if they were expecting something that might take a very long time to arrive. When the reflection, me noticed them, they nodded in acknowledgement, a gesture of professional courtesy between people who understood the particular loneliness of guarding empty buildings in the dark hours. The elevator reached the lobby, and the reflection disappeared as the doors opened. I stepped out into the familiar marble, floored space, but I could still feel the weight of those watching eyes, the presence of the other guards who had found their way to the floor that existed between floors. Over the following weeks, I began to notice changes in my own reflection. During my rounds, whenever I passed a mirror or looked into the polished surface of an elevator door, I could see traces of the gray carpeting beneath my feet, even when I was standing on the patterned commercial carpet of the existing floors. My reflection showed me moving through spaces that blended the real building with the impossible architecture of floor 13, as if I was gradually transitioning between the two spaces. The other guards appeared more frequently in these reflections, sometimes walking their own rounds through corridors that ran parallel to mine, sometimes standing in groups in the gray lobby, watching the elevator doors with the patience of people who had learned to wait for things that might never come. I began to understand that floor 13 wasn't just a single impossible space. It was a nexus, a gathering point for all the night guards who had worked this building, who had walked these halls during the quiet hours when the boundary between existing and non-existing becomes permeable. We were all there, in some sense, continuing our rounds in the space between spaces, maintaining security for a building that existed in the margins of architectural possibility. My shifts started feeling different, less like work and more like a pilgrimage to a place where time moved according to different rules. I would arrive at 10 p.m. and clock in normally, but by midnight, I could feel myself beginning to drift between the official building and its impossible 13th floor. My rounds took me through both spaces simultaneously, checking doors that existed and doors that didn't, ensuring the security of floors that were built and floors that simply were. The building management never noticed the discrepancy. The electronic security system recorded my movements through the official floors, logging my keycard access and noting my adherence to the prescribed patrol schedule. But the real work was happening in the reflection, in the space between 12 and 14, where the night guards maintained their eternal vigilance. Last week, I submitted my retirement paperwork. 3 years is enough time to spend walking the halls of any building, even one that contains more floors than it should. But I know that retirement from the day shift doesn't mean retirement from the night shift. Some jobs follow you home, and some responsibilities extend beyond the boundaries of official employment. Tonight will be my final official shift, but I suspect it won't be my last visit to floor 13. The gray, carpeted lobby is patient, and it has been waiting for new guards to join the rotation for much longer than any corporate personnel file would indicate. The elevator doors will continue to show reflections, and in those reflections, the impossible floor will maintain its vigil. We are the night guards of the space between spaces, are the security force for the floors that exist in the margins of blueprints and building codes. And when morning comes, we'll fade back into the reflections, waiting for the next night to resume our rounds in the building that never sleeps, on the floors that never were but always are.